Chapter 589. Although Su Shenxing had long known that this world was a little strange, he did not expect it to be this strange. There's even a tree that grows bread. He carefully looked at the thing that had just been plucked from the tree. In theory it should be some kind of fruit. But no matter how he looked at it, this thing looked like bread. It was not like the starchy fruit of the baobab tree on earth, but the kind that was no different from ordinary bread in the true sense. This is the Rorosa fruit tree. It is said that it used to be a very ordinary fruit tree, but because of the long war between the humans and the orcs, the land became barren, and because of that there was a shortage of food. Millions of people in the entire eastern plains faced famine. The legendary hero who witnessed all of this transformed this fruit tree with magic, and made it grow bread that could be eaten directly. Louise explained to Su Shenxing as if she was familiar with the tree. But in order to prevent the ecosystem from being affected by the Rorosa fruit tree, the hero set a limit. First of all, the number of this fruit tree can only be kept constant. Can be less, but it can never be more. Then this fruit tree can only grow in the area near the western cliff of Timothy. Finally, this fruit tree rots very quickly after leaving the branch. Thanks to its unique ecology, even the kings of some small countries in the east have never tasted this magical fruit. Hearing what she said, Su Shenxing also gave up the idea of bringing this thing back to Emily to taste. Although the little girl might really be able to grow this thing on Earth, the person who created this plant must have thought long and hard before setting such a serious condition. It was better for him not to mess around blindly. After all, many things from this world were likely to have strange mutations when transplanted to other worlds. Although he had not experienced it himself, but when he chatted with Lux in the Space Administration, she mentioned that there was once a deacon who had a mild illness similar to a cold. Because he insisted on working with the illness, he went to another world and brought the virus with him. In the end, the virus mutated into a terrible zombie virus in the New World, and directly destroyed a civilization that had developed close to the interstellar era in the New World. The legendary hero you are talking about, could it be the teacher of the Lord of Luomosai? So he wisely changed the topic. I'm not sure about that either. After all, it's been nearly 1,000 years since the legendary era. Very few documents from that time have been preserved until now. Louise smiled bitterly. To be honest, I felt like I was dreaming when I met those two people who had lived since the Age of Legends. I see. Su Shenxing didn't say anything more. He just took a big bite of the thing called rosa fruit, which was almost the same as bread. Even the texture of this thing was no different from bread, but there was more of a fruity sweetness in the taste. After filling their stomachs for a while, they continued their journey towards the western cliff. Did you find it? In a small town near the western cliff, there was a rather hidden underground tavern. At this moment, in the corner of this tavern, there were two men wrapped in black attire who were engaged in some kind of transaction. The slightly shorter and fatter one asked the other in a slightly impatient tone. Of course, those idiots Reedman probably never thought that the poor people under their rule would rebel. Apart from the research notes that the girl took away during the chaos, the other things have already been exchanged with the rebel leaders for some small benefits. The tall man seemed to be very proud of this. Even the Reedman family's legendary treasure Olavia's skull wasn't left behind. Those who don't know a single word are considered lowly. They don't understand the value of these things. Can you understand the Reedman family's necromancy without the research notes? The short man seemed to be skeptical. He picked up the wine bottle on the side and poured half a cup of strong liquor into the tall man's cup. Also, are you sure those forces won't notice us? Although we lack some of the latest research results, fortunately, the basic technology is recorded in other seized documents. If we let the necromancers in the association study it, it shouldn't be too difficult to accomplish our goal. The tall man took a sip of the strong liquor in front of him and then let out a long sigh. Moreover, we didn't show up from the beginning to the end of the Reedman family's rebellion. No one should have noticed our existence. Those fools in the King's Council are probably still arguing over who should take the blame. That's good. The short man seemed relieved. Compared to my side, how was the result on your side? Then the tall man asked. It's not that easy. After all, it's much more difficult to steal that thing under the eyes of the Queen of the West, Shalania Katerina K. Alicato, compared to you inciting those commoners to rebel against the honest Reedman family. The short man shook his head, his voice sounding a bit awkward. After a moment of silence, the short man suddenly asked, by the way, since we've seized Oravia's skull, can't we just use it to summon the evil god Oravia? To be honest, the risk on our side is a bit too high. After all, the Queen of the West is a vampire who has lived for more than 1,000 years. She's not even afraid of sunlight. If there's even the slightest mistake, we might be uprooted by her." After saying that, the short man seemed to have thought of something and his whole body trembled. Then he probably felt ashamed of his cowardice, so he took a big gulp of strong liquor and ended up choking and coughing. Unfortunately, it's impossible to summon the evil god Auravia. The Reedman family has had Auravia's skulk for many years. They must have secretly tried to summon that lord, but from the seized documents, there were no successful examples. Occasionally they could trade with the evil god, but the things they got from the trade were nothing special. The tall man shook his head. "And with the loss of magic power in this world, I'm afraid that the longer we delay, the lower the chances of success. Our hope for revival can only be pinned on that you found the hero of the legendary era who completely destroyed our Red Lotus Church 1,000 years ago, Seve Adrian's grave." Chapter 590. So this is the destination? At first, Su Xinxing had been influenced by the local tomb-robbing dramas, so much so that he thought the place the city lord had instructed them to go to was definitely a relatively remote place, even if it wasn't the wilderness. But in truth, this place called Western Continent Town was fairly flourishing. That's because the Western Continent Cliff originally didn't have too many resources. But several years ago, an exploration team from the east discovered an astonishing amount of Ilum veins on the Windy Plateau. Add to that the special stone materials of the Windy Plateau itself have many uses. This area gradually prospered as the veins were mined. As a noble, Louise, who had more information channels than commoners, naturally knew about the situation in this area. She told Su Xinxing what she knew about this area. "So that's how it is. But this makes things a bit troublesome. If this place was as desolate as Su Xinxing had thought, finding a few people wouldn't be too troublesome. But it was much more difficult to find the culprit in this situation. He didn't even know which way to go. Is there no way to find the way automatically? This isn't good." Just as Su Xinxing was feeling vexed over this matter, Louise came up with an idea. "Why don't we go directly to the leader of the Timothy Empire and ask for her help?" She suggested to Su Xinxing, "If we use the name of the neutral city of Luomosai, they might help us. I don't have any other ideas anyway. Let's do as you say." Su Xinxing naturally wasn't unreasonable and immediately decided to use the young lady's method. Although they could have gone directly to the Western Continent Town's mayor, there was an 80% chance that the other party had no clue about the so-called tomb robbers. Or rather, if it was a group of tomb robbers that could be dealt with by a mere mayor, there was no need for the governor of Lumoxi to entrust this matter to Su Xinxing. The leader of Timosine, the queen of the western region, Shalania Katerina Kate Alicado, lives in the suspended palace on the western cliff. Roland explained to Su Xinxing as he pointed at the cliff in the distance that looked like a huge wall between heaven and earth. It's a building that was left behind from the legendary era and built with materials that can only be produced in the abyss. That's why it can stand for so many years without collapsing. In addition, some people say that the queen of the western region, Shalania Katerina Kate Alicado, is also an ancient who has lived since the legendary era. In fact, I used to think that this was just a rumor, but after meeting the Lord of Luomosai, I feel that this ridiculous saying might actually be true. Louise smiled embarrassedly. "If that's the case, then the princess of the western region with a very long name should know the city lord of Luomoshi. Maybe she can really help us." Su Xinxing listened to the girl's words and couldn't help but nod his head. But the problem now is how to go up to the suspended palace. The queen of the western region, Shalania Katerina Kate Alicado, and her servants are all vampires, so they basically fly up. It's not easy for ordinary people to go up. Even the steam gliders produced by the Steam Chamber of Commerce can easily crash into the cliff and self-destruct. When it came to business, the girl couldn't help but frown as she became distressed. "I'll leave this to me." Su Xinxing confidently took care of everything. Louise naturally didn't doubt this Lord Evil God and peacefully left the matter of how to go up the mountain to Su Xinxing. Thus, after the two finished their lunch in the western town, they continued to rush to the bottom of the western cliff. As the saying goes, if you look at a mountain it will kill a horse. Although looking at the majestic western cliff from the western town, it actually took the two nearly 4 hours to reach the western cliff at a normal speed of about 40 km/h after renting a carriage. After temporarily parking the carriage in a quarry under the western cliff, the two began to look for the location of the suspended palace. The cliffs here are bare. No matter how I look at it, it doesn't look like there's a palace hidden here. Or rather, when we rushed here from Western Town, I found it strange because I couldn't see the floating palace you mentioned at all. After searching for half a day, Su Xinxing couldn't help but feel a little strange. Even if his strength decreased, the characteristics he possessed would not disappear. Whether it was camouflage or illusion, they were ineffective against Su Xinxing. On the contrary, things like optical camouflage that didn't affect him were a little effective against him. In theory, if something like optical camouflage was used on something too large like a palace, then even Su Xinxing should be able to vaguely see the outline of the object. Yes, I'm not too sure about the specifics, but the original owner of the suspended palace was also a vampire, so it only appears at night. Louise racked her brains to recall her pitiful knowledge of the suspended palace on the western cliff. Su Xinxing looked up and found that although most of the sky was blocked by the cliff, the exposed part was just dyed a little red. It was probably dusk now. In other words, we have to wait here for a few more hours? Louise hurriedly nodded. Just as Su Xinxing helplessly sighed and planned to find a place to take a dump, the sound of flapping wings came from above them. It's a nightstick. Louise cried out in surprise like an ordinary little girl. A nightstick? Could it be that the creator of this world was also a fanatical Harry Potter fan? With such doubts, Su Xinxing looked up and saw two creatures that looked like bats that were magnified 10 times over descending from the sky. Other than the fact that their wings looked like bats, these two creatures that were slightly larger than calves looked more like monsters from another world called wyverns. However, from their silly appearance with their tongues hanging out like huskies and drooling like saliva, it was hard to be hostile. Yes, a nightstick is a very rare magical creature. It is said that it was once the pet of one of the first 8 races, the nightstick. But after the nightstick went extinct, the nightstick became rare. Louise seemed to like this animal a lot. When she spoke, her eyes sparkled, making Su Xinxing involuntarily think of Mo Li, who saw delicious food. They are very friendly to humans and almost never attack them. Also, when they meet people in the wild in distress, they will provide help. Because the nightstick can melt into the night and not be harmed by humans, it was listed as a magical creature in the 120th revision of the Illustrated Handbook of Magical Creatures. In addition, its cute and furry appearance is very likable, so it is very popular in the Shaking Wind Chime Chamber of Commerce's series of magical creature dolls. Is this thing cute? Su Xinxing looked at the two large bats. No matter how he looked at it, it had nothing to do with the word cute. As for melting into the night, Su Xinxing felt that 80% of it was the ability to transform into nothingness. At most, it was just subspace travel. It was nothing too noteworthy. The two large bats did not pay attention to Su Xinxing. They just grabbed the edge of the carriage, one at the front and one at the back, and directly lifted the carriage together. Whoa. Su Xinxing could not help but make a sound of doubt. Don't worry, the Queen of the West, Shalania Katerina Kate Alicado, is the only person in this world who can domesticate a nightstick. They are probably sent by the other side to take us to the floating palace. Chapter 591. Two large bats. Yi Qi brought Su Xinxing's carriage and crashed into the mountain wall. Su Xinxing, who had been tested for a long time, didn't feel anything at all. First of all, he had a rough idea of how this thing worked. If this mountain rock wasn't made of some kind of material that was between real and illusory, then these large bats had a rune or a key that could pass through the mountain rock. In any case, with Su Xinxing's physique that could ignore all illusions, only these two, or similar, might be able to fool his eyes. Second of all, even though he was in a weakened state, he still had the combat power of a planet. Let alone a mountain rock, even if he crashed into lava, he could guarantee that nothing would happen to him. The girl next to him wasn't so calm. Louise hugged Su Xinxing's arm and closed her eyes in fear, like a timid girl about to ride a screaming ride. It was fine because Su Xinxing's body was good, but if it was an ordinary person, his arm would probably be bruised by now. The moment they crashed into the mountain wall, Su Xinxing felt like he crashed into a big soap bubble. He only felt a slight obstruction, then everything in front of him suddenly became clear. Even though he didn't know how wide the so-called Wind Gap Plateau was, judging from the size of this cave, it wasn't an exaggeration to say that it hollowed out a mountain. Almost all of the rock walls were inlaid with strange sparkling crystals. If it weren't for the fact that the radiation from these things might hurt little Chuketsu, Sushinshing would have broken off some of them and brought them back as gifts. The bottom of the cave was flowing lava. From time to time, lava would spurt out from the ground like fountains. The highest was more than 10 meters high. However, the most eye-catching thing in the entire cave was the creation in the middle. Because it was in the middle of a bright lava lake, if one didn't look at its appearance, it would look like there was a small mountain in the middle of a mountain. But if one looked closely, they would find that it was a huge building. There were countless towers and palaces on it, but they were connected to each other and became a single entity. That's right, it wasn't a building complex, but a single mountain-like building like a castle hundreds of meters high. This is, Louise swallowed, the palace of the Queen of the West. This is the first time I've seen such a building. Oh. Su Shinshing's expression was much more indifferent. This building was indeed quite amazing. If it was placed on Earth, it would definitely be another wonder, the kind that could beat the other 8 wonders of the world. But if it was based on the foundation of Earth or a similar world in terms of size, Su Shinshing's experience, a cottage in the Great Devil's world could probably beat this thing. Why do I feel like this thing is more like a place for dwarves than a vampire's castle? After carefully looking at it for a moment, Su Shinshing commented. Because the level of technology in many fantasy worlds was not high, when it came to steel production or forging weapons and equipment, the natural heat source of lava was very convenient for the dwarf race with rough skin. Therefore, even in different fantasy worlds, the dwarves who liked to forge would basically gather in places with lava that was not as dangerous as volcanoes. Is that so? Louise tilted her head doubtfully. Are there no dwarves in your world? Su Shinshing couldn't help but ask curiously. After all, this world also looked like a standard fantasy world. According to the world's information diffraction and mimetic phenomena, the probability of the birth of a dwarf race should be quite high. According to the legend of our creation, the dwarf race was among the original 8 races at the beginning. In fact, many documents handed down from ancient times also recorded that until the legendary era, there were still a small number of dwarves who could communicate with humans. But after the end of the legendary era, these dwarves all disappeared. Some scholars think that they went extinct because they couldn't adapt to the changes in the world. Louise explained to Su Shinshing. When a faceless man wearing a classical suit appeared in front of Su Shinshing and the others and welcomed them into the magnificent castle, Su Shinshing couldn't help but frown. Although she kept looking around because she was curious about the surrounding environment, Louise immediately noticed the change in Su Shinshing's expression and couldn't help but ask him in a low voice what he found. This building is not a product of this world. Su Shinshing carefully looked around and then answered affirmatively. Right, in that case, I once heard that Timothy used to be a territory occupied by the Dark Alliance formed by abyssal creatures. But after the end of the legendary era, it returned to human management. Could it be that this castle is a creation of the abyss? The startled Louise hurriedly and carefully looked at the furnishings around her, fearing that the full set of plate armor not far away would suddenly move or something. No, that's not what I meant. Su Shinshing felt a headache coming on. For the people of this world, the abyss was already a different world. But for Su Shinshing, the so-called abyss was actually just some subsidiary space of this world, just like the relationship between the present world of Earth and the netherworld. But this building was even more different, and it could even be said that it was fundamentally different. Unfortunately, although Su Shinshing had a wealth of knowledge and experience, his own knowledge was not profound, so there was no way to distinguish where this castle came from. Louise suddenly made a sound of surprise. What's wrong? Su Shinshing was startled by her sudden change in attitude. I know the ancient characters on the wall over there. Louise looked at the patterns on the wall not far away in surprise. That's not just. Originally, because Su Shinshing thought that it was just a pattern, he didn't notice it, but when he focused on the pattern, his protection worked. Edric? He tried to read it. It has the same surname as the city lord of Luomosai and the head of the guards. Louise continued. If that's the case, could this castle be? With her reminder, Su Shinshing also remembered. That's right, this castle is the 5th Academy of Edric Academy from 1,000 years ago. At this time, a crisp and sweet voice sounded from the edge of the corridor. Su Shinshing and the others looked toward the sound, but saw a beautiful girl with a hot body. She was wearing a red muslin dress and was leisurely walking toward them. I have already heard the general situation from Alyssa and the others, guests from another world. So first, let me introduce myself. I am the Queen of the West you are looking for, Shalania Katerina Kate Alicado, the current owner of this castle. Chapter 592. Hello. Because it was the first time she had seen the legendary figure, Louise looked excited. I am Louise Reedman. But the Queen of the West's eyes only stayed on her for a moment, and then turned to Su Shenxing. They really look alike. I didn't expect to see that bastard's face again in this life. The image of the Queen of the West, who was originally full of majesty, turned into an ordinary girl as she spoke through gritted teeth. Do you have any grudges with that Adrian's ancestor? Su Shenxing racked his brains but still couldn't think of how to address himself from 1,000 years ago in this world. In the end he could only use a more subtle word to refer to him. That bastard said something about reproductive isolation so he wouldn't marry me. Later he said something about wanting to spend the rest of his life as a human. He actually left me and passed away. A legendary mage obviously has other ways to prolong his life. Not sure if it was Su Shenxing's appearance that evoked her memories, but the Queen of the West spoke faster and faster, and her voice became more and more bitter. Well, it seems that Senior owes a lot of love debts. Su Shenxing lowered his head and didn't dare to say a word, for fear that the other party's anger would burn his head. If there was anything that Su Shenxing was more afraid of besides seafood, it was probably the so-called love debts. So many times Su Shenxing actually understood in his heart, but he would pretend to be a blockhead. Love debts were the most difficult thing to repay in all worlds. Don't ask him how he knew. Fortunately, the Queen of the West's mind was still clear. Even after 1,000 years there were no signs of dementia, and she quickly adjusted her mood. Sorry, I let you see my undignified side. She took a deep breath and returned to the majestic state she had when they first met. It was just that both Su Shenxing and Louise could no longer be in awe of this girl. So about our mission? Su Shenxing immediately and considerately changed the topic. Let's talk as we walk. I've already asked the maids to prepare dinner. The Queen of the Western region curled up her lips into an elegant smile. Then she reluctantly withdrew her gaze from Su Shenxing's face, turned around and walked away. Su Shenxing glanced at Louise and found that she was in a state of confusion. He could only sigh and follow the girl. For some reason Su Shenxing began to miss Emily, who would raise his hands high and cheer for dinner. As I've told you, this is Academy Block 5 of the Adrian Magic Academy, the place where Wei Adrian faced off against the Age of Destruction. On the way, the princess of the Western region talked to herself as they walked. When Su Shenxing heard her he couldn't help but be taken aback. But I heard that Adrian, his ancestor avoided the Age of Destruction. It seems that although the princess of the Western region cursed Su Shenxing Sr. as a bastard, her feelings for him were quite deep. That's why your goal is to capture those grave robbers. If possible, take back everything that belongs to Audiobook Academy that they stole. Then she said what Su Shenxing expected. Wouldn't it be better to leave it to the police or detectives? Although Su Shenxing muttered to himself he didn't have any objections. And from a certain point of view, if he allowed them to do as they pleased, those grave robbers might end up robbing him instead. Although there would be differences because of the difference in the world and this him was not him, it still made Su Shenxing very unhappy. Don't worry, it's fine. And so he readily agreed to the mission. Chapter 593. After resting for a night in the palace of the Queen of the West, Su Shenxing and the others were ready to set off. May I ask, why are you here? But there seemed to be an extra person in the carriage. This made Su Shenxing cover his forehead and ask helplessly. Don't mind it, it's just that I haven't visited that guy's grave for a while, so this time I'm taking you there. There was a standard Sundara scene. Su Shenxing criticized in his heart. I always feel that you're thinking of something very impolite. The Queen of the West narrowed her wine-red eyes and stared at Su Shenxing. For some reason the latter felt pressured. No, it's just that for a queen to sit in a small broken carriage like ours, don't you think it's undignified? Only those who are lowly in their bones would value something like dignity. The other party just answered casually, and then as if she was no longer interested in Su Shenxing, she turned her head and looked out the window at the scenery she should have been tired of. They were silent all the way. Even Louise, who was originally very excited, was worried about the queen, so she became silent. Su Shenxing was also the kind of person who didn't like to talk much except to acquaintances, because once he spoke, It would be easy to expose his true nature of being a clown. Today's carriage was not pulled by horses, but by the big bats called night unicorns from yesterday. Interestingly, when they folded their wings, they looked like a combination of a monkey and a fox with a very strange appearance and color. Although at first Su Shenxing had doubts about whether this kind of thing could really run fast, in fact this strange creature ran quite fast. Because old Su was used to his own speed, he didn't feel much about other speeds because in his view they were all extremely slow. But just from the way the scenery outside the window retreated, it was probably comparable to the speed of a high-speed train. About half an hour later they arrived at their destination. Oh, what a surprise! Su Shenxing opened the curtain in front of the carriage, looked at the scene in front of him and couldn't help but let out a surprised sound. It's actually like this. Due to the influence of television and movies, he originally thought that this kind of cemetery was not like the ancient mausoleums of the Celestial Dynasty, but like the vast grassland with many tombs erected in foreign movies. In the end, what appeared before them was a bottomless pit. Even with Su Shenxing's eyesight, he couldn't see anything when he looked down. This place was originally the world's guide, the location of the world axis. In the war against the Age of Destruction, Shi Wei had extracted the world axis and forged it into the most powerful weapon against the Age of Destruction. Therefore there's nothing down here. It's the closest place to the concept of nothing in this world. As if she already knew that Su Shenxing would be surprised by this, the Queen of the Western region explained, and the floating island in the middle is the location of Adrian Cemetery. How should I put it? It's really surprising. Looking at the floating island, he muttered to himself. It wasn't that he hadn't seen a floating island before, but the way the floating island was connected to the outside world surprised him. There were 6 huge rainbow-colored bridges made up of countless dazzling petals. The beautiful petals at the edge of the bridges poured down into the bottomless abyss like a waterfall. It was a spectacular sight with a different kind of beauty. It's the apologetic flower. Legend has it that if you find a flower with 6 petals, you can communicate with the dead. Louise whispered to Su Shenxing. Where did these petals come from? Su Shenxing asked curiously. It's a concept. The apologetic flower itself is a miracle brought about by Shi Wei, a symbol of the living's remembrance and remembrance of the dead. Every time an apologetic flower blooms in this world, another flower's petal will appear here. Before it falls to the bottom of the world and becomes nothing, these petals will be accepted by the world itself, and then new apologetic flowers will bloom in other parts of the world. The Queen of the Western region answered. She paused for a moment before continuing. If one day the people of this world no longer have nostalgia for the dead, the apologetic flower will disappear. This cemetery will also sink to the bottom of the world and become a part of nothing. In other words, as long as people are afraid of death and still have memories of the dead, this cemetery will exist forever? Su Shenxing couldn't help but ask curiously. I'm afraid that there is nothing eternal in this world. Even the legendary archmages who are closest to the vortex of chaos can't resist the passage of time and the pride of humans who don't want to become abnormal. The Queen of the Western region's voice became a little lower. She was probably talking about the choice of the me in this world. Su Shenxing thought to himself. From here on out we can't take a car. Let's go down and prepare to walk. Then, under the leadership of the Queen of the Western region, the 3 slowly crossed the bridge made of apologetic flower petals and arrived at the city gate. At the moment, the gate was guarded by a humanoid creature that was about 3 meters tall and had muscles that didn't look like a human at all. Greetings, Your Majesty the Queen. The humanoid creature used a voice as rough as its appearance to greet the Queen of the Western region. You may rise. Did anything unusual happen here? The Queen of the Western region waved her hand and asked. Nothing unusual for the time being, but 2 rare guests have come. The other party replied. Who dares to come here? The Queen of the Western region suddenly became a little interested. Why do you make it sound like it's scary? Su Shenxing whispered behind her. Because this place is called the closest place to the soul territory and many of the guards here are undead creatures. Therefore, on the human side, Adrian Cemetery is one of the 3 most dangerous places, along with the Cave of Grief and the Amber Cave, which have extremely high mortality rates. Louise explained to Su Shenxing. That's your human prejudice. Humans are like this, they will be vigilant and suspicious of other species, so they are not welcomed by other species. Unexpectedly, the Queen of the Western region heard the 2 whispering and immediately snorted. expressing her disdain. Your Majesty the Queen? The huge humanoid creature seemed a little confused. It's okay, I'm not talking to you. You continued to report. The other party nodded its head that was slightly bigger than a pumpkin. The visitor is the saintess of the pure white church, Lady Aurelia, and her attendant, the new sacred silver swordswoman Anelita. A troublesome fellow has come. The queen of the western region frowned, which was rare. Pure white church? Saintess? Unlike the surprised Louise, Su Xinxing showed a puzzled expression. I guess that fellow is also here to visit Shi Wei's grave. Well, I'm a little interested to see what expression she will make when she sees you. Scope. In just a moment, the queen of the western region showed a smirk and said with a rather wicked tone, could it be that the saintess was also an old acquaintance of this world? How promiscuous was he in this world? Chapter 594. Not long after arriving at the floating island of the cemetery, Su Xinxing and the others saw the adoratress and her attendant that the giant guard had mentioned. Every time I thought that the next time we meet would be when you lead the church's army to attack the western region. I never thought that it would never happen. The queen of the western region sighed and looked at the adoratress not far away. With all due respect, Su Xinxing carefully looked at the so-called adoratress for a long time and found that he was not confused by illusions or the like. He then asked the queen of the western region, why does the adoratress look like a baby? It might be a little too much to call her a baby, but from her appearance she was indeed no more than 3 years old. It would not be a problem to call her a young girl. But what the queen of the western region said just now sounded like she was talking to an old acquaintance who was both a friend and a foe. This strange contrast made Su Xinxing a little confused. Or is that girl who looks like an unmarried mother holding a baby the adoratress you mentioned? Rude. How rude is this? Before the queen of the western region could speak, the girl holding the little girl had already blushed and scolded loudly. I am the chief attendant of the adoratress, the sword princess Anirita, who has inherited the name of Holy Silver. The girl with short chestnut-colored hair first sternly cleared her name of being an unmarried mother. Then she raised the little girl in her hand and said, this is the Holy Spirit who can guide the future of light and hope for mankind. The Holy Spirit who has been the benchmark of the pure white church since the legendary era, Lady Aurelia. She had been alive since the legendary era? Then she was about 1,000 years old. Su Xinxing suddenly looked at the little girl in shock. Anita, put me down, I'm a little dizzy. The adoratress, who was unconsciously raised high by her attendant, made a weak protest. I'm sorry. The girl with short chestnut-colored hair immediately came back to her senses and put the future of mankind in her hands, the benchmark of the church back in place. That saintess is indeed someone from the same era as me. However, her existence is somewhat special. Things like age cannot leave any traces on her body. Her appearance is related to her current state. The queen of the western region casually explained to Su Xinxing, from the looks of it, I'm afraid she just lost a lot of blood not long ago. Could it be that her period is bleeding? Su Xinxing replied without rhyme or reason. As a result, all the girls present rolled their eyes at him. This appearance looks like Mr. Shi's prophecy came true. The saintess, who was in the arms of the girl with short chestnut-colored hair, stared straight at Su Xinxing. Although I already knew the content of the prophecy, the degree of similarity is still surprising. Oh, so you know about that prophecy too. As a result, the queen of the western region, who had been looking forward to seeing the strange expression of the saintess, suddenly showed a bored expression. After all, in this world the only ones who can survive until the day the prophecy comes true are you and me, the immortals. It's understandable that he would tell me, isn't it? The baby-sized saintess said these words in a rather mature tone, which made Su Xinxing feel very uncomfortable. Then Su Xinxing suddenly noticed that Louise, who had always been talkative, seemed to have stopped talking. He looked at the girl strangely. What's wrong? Nothing, I'm just a little nervous. The girl replied in a small voice. Su Xinxing suddenly realized. Come to think of it, this girl was a necromancer. Although the mayor of Luomosai and the queen of the western region did not care about her identity, the one in front of them was now recognized by the queen of the western region as a true saintess of the church. Moreover, she was of the highest rank. Even with Su Xinxing's shallow knowledge of this world, he knew that the religion with the largest number of believers was the pure white church. Because of this, It was natural that Louise would feel nervous in front of them. "So what is the purpose of your visit this time?" the Queen of the Western region asked the two visitors from the Pure White Church. It was probably after they had finished their reminiscing that the Queen of the Western region regained her regal bearing. The cemetery of martyrs that the Pure White Church had sealed off for almost 100 years had been raided. Many of the corpses were missing, and although we caught a few of the raiders, they seemed to have been brainwashed. Their words were all jumbled up and illogical. The Saintess had also entered a businesslike state, although it made Su Shenxing feel even more out of place. In the end, we only managed to find out that the mastermind seemed to need powerful corpses when they were alive. "I see. I think I understand now." The Queen of the Western region nodded, her wine-red eyes showing a hint of coldness. From Su Shenxing's point of view, the raiders who raided the cemetery of martyrs of the Pure White Church were in cahoots with those who raided Adrian's cemetery. And when it came to powerful corpses when they were alive, she, Adrian, who had saved the world 1,000 years ago, was naturally the best candidate. Obviously, the people of the Pure White Church had also thought of this, which was why they came here to see if they could catch the mastermind. But unfortunately, you've come too late. I've already put a lot of people in this cemetery to patrol and guard it. There are even undead dragons and black merit knights. If those criminals are still in their right minds, I'm afraid they won't come here again," the Queen of the Western region said proudly. Then, in the next moment, there was a violent explosion at the cemetery not far away. Su Shenxing and the Saintess looked at the Queen of the Western region at the same time, who had been bragging just a moment ago. The latter was stunned for a moment, and then she was embarrassed and angry at being slapped in the face. "It seems that the undead dragons and black merit knights can't stop those people," the Saintess mocked. "It's fine." The Queen of the Western region took a deep breath, and her eyes were cold. "There's still the Vampire Queen." As soon as she finished speaking, she turned into countless bats that blotted out the sky and flew towards the site of the explosion. "Annie, let's go too." "Yes, Saintess." Then the unmarried mother carrying the baby also quickly left. "Lord Evil God." Seeing the two members of the Pure White Church leave, Louise finally breathed a sigh of relief and looked at Su Shenxing, only to find that the latter's expression wasn't very good. Because this world wasn't spherical, people's vision was much wider than on Earth. And with Su Shenxing's eyesight, he could actually see where the explosion was. It was a huge diamond-shaped crystal prism, with a line of words from this world engraved on it. "To the ancestor of our Dean, the great man Shiwei Adrian, who lies here in eternal rest." Chapter 595. Following the second explosion, the huge crystal monument slowly tilted from its floating state before crashing into the ground and breaking in two. The bats that blotted out the sky let out ear-piercing screeches, and the scene was as frightening as the end of the world. However, the grave robbers seemed to have been prepared to disturb the Vampire Queen. Unbeknownst to them, they had set up several huge rapid-fire crossbows around the cemetery, and in the span of a few breaths, countless bolts were shot into the sky. The bats that were caught off guard were hit by the bolts, and for a moment they fell to the ground like rain. But if that was all it took to kill the Queen of the West, the vampire elder would not have lived for 1,000 years. The bats turned into a dark, eerie cloud, and a huge palm reached out from the cloud, smashing the rapid-fire crossbows into pieces. The bolts from the rapid-fire crossbows could not even penetrate the skin of the huge palm. Seeing this, the grave robbers began to throw out fist-sized red crystals in an orderly manner. Those were Ilum crystals that had been nitrified, and only needed a little mana as a catalyst to activate them into an unstable state that could easily explode. Sure enough, after a series of explosions, the edge of the black cloud was shaved off, and the huge palm vaporized and disappeared. The human form of the Queen of the West then appeared in the last of the black cloud. "It seems that I have underestimated you." She frowned. Though the bat's damage was neither painful nor ticklish, it was definitely a wound. A fire element Ilum crystal with holy light magic. "So that's why you attacked the Pure White Church." If it was just fire elemental Ilum crystals, it would not be a problem for the Vampire Queen. But if it was mixed with holy light magic as an explosive agent, it would be a different story. Moreover, she had confirmed from the sky that half of Seve Adrian's grave had been dug up, and the corpses of the soldiers patrolling the cemetery were also lying near the grave. It seemed that they had been murdered. As the Queen of the West returned to her original form, the grave robbers cheered excitedly, probably thinking that victory was in their hands. You lawless grave robbers! Accept the punishment of the holy light. In the next moment, Anita, who was carrying the saintess, had arrived, and with a swing of her sword she killed a few of the grave robbers who had poked their heads out. And so she showed a mocking smile at the vampire queen. The latter was already quite upset that the grave robbers looked down on her, and this added fuel to the fire. The vampire queen snorted, and with a wave of her small hand, dark red blood flashed endlessly. Every time this light appeared, the blood of a grave robber's body would be sucked dry. By the time Su Shinxing and the rest had arrived, the grave robbers of the grave robbers, and distorted, and the voice, but the voice. Although the voice was roaring, the voice. It's our family's spell. But most of it seems to have been tampered with by them. They deliberately used more dangerous and radical spells in many places. Louise immediately recognized what the other party was yelling about. At the same time, Su Shinxing felt something was wrong almost at the same time when the other party raised the thing in his hand. It was a strange feeling of familiarity. He originally thought that the feeling came from the tomb of the other him, but now it seemed that was not the case. The thing in the other party's hand was a skull. Almost in a flash, Su Shinxing had already determined that the thing was the purpose of his trip, his former head. It seemed that the short and fat guy was forced into a dead end, so this guy took out his head and wanted to use the spell to summon the evil god to see if there was a way to survive. The problem was that now that Su Shinxing was here, this guy who was forced into a corner would not be able to summon anything. That was what Su Shinxing thought at first. But that was not the case. As the short and fat guy chanted, a black fog that did not exist in this world appeared behind him as if it was made of pure malice and filth. The evil was so strong that the saintess let out a sorrowful cry when it came to this world. Her sacred blood began to boil in her body. Haha, it actually worked. All of you tremble before the evil god Auravaya. It's an anomaly that surpasses the 7 great demon kings of the mythological era, the most powerful in this world. The short and fat guy laughed maniacally. If I knew that I could summon Auravaya, I wouldn't have needed Shiwei Adrian. In the next moment he was sucked into the black fog. Chewing sounds and screams could be heard, and then he gradually stopped breathing. See, the evil god Auravaya actually exists. The vampire queen could not help muttering regretfully as she glanced at the saintess who was still moaning. What should we do now? Anelita, who had short chestnut-colored hair, panicked at once. On the other side, after devouring all the grave robbers, the black fog had already set its sights on them. It seemed to have nurtured some kind of humanoid entity within its body. With just a light step, it appeared in front of everyone and reached out its hand to grab the saintess and Anita. It seemed that the holy light magic on the two of them disgusted it. Almost at that moment, Su Shinxing had already appeared in front of the saintess and Anelita. He punched the arm of the black fog with his right hand. The moment the two fists collided, a terrifying power erupted from within. Anelita was blown dozens of meters away by the violent force. The ground could not withstand the shockwave and immediately caved in like the bottom of a pot. Even Louise, who was dozens of meters away, was blown away. Only the vampire queen was able to stand firm and was not blown away by the shockwave. What the hell are you? Su Shinxing asked the saintess. But of course he did not get any answer. At that moment, Louise cried out in surprise. Adrian's grave. The others took the time to look in that direction, only to see the tomb of the great man Seymour Adric crumbling. But the tomb was empty. It was an empty grave. Chapter 596. How is this possible? Why is Sylvie's grave empty? Even in the face of a powerful enemy, the queen of the western region could not help but exclaim, I saw him being buried with my own eyes. On the other hand, Su Shinxing had no time to pay attention to the fact that his grave was empty in this world. He originally thought that even if his strength had declined greatly, he should still be an invincible existence in this distorted small world. But in reality that was not the case. At least, the strange being shrouded in black fog summoned by the short and fat grave robber using Su Shinxing's skull was on par with him now. It was not that the opponent was strong. In terms of combat skills, the person in the black fog could be considered a very good warrior. But in Su Shinxing's view, The opponent was more like a berserker who had no rationality. It was purely based on a sea of combat experience that had deeply engraved countless combat skills into its bones and turned them into its own instincts. Sushenshin had long stopped using this kind of combat style in the Lattice world. Thus, even though the black fog could block Sushenshin's perception, and he couldn't even see the other party's appearance, he was able to get a general idea of the other party's size and fighting style in just the blink of an eye. The biggest problem for Sushenshin was that his attacks could not effectively cause damage to the opponent. His fist that could shatter mountains hit the opponent's body, but it was like a stone sinking into the sea. His kick that could crush the earth was like stepping on a sponge, there was no tangible feedback. But the physical phenomenon on the outside proved that the opponent had a physical body. Otherwise, the destructive power of Sushenshin's fist at the beginning would have been enough to destroy the entire floating island, and not just a big crater on the ground. Girl over there, quickly take your saintess away from here. Otherwise she might have to die here. After putting some distance between himself and the black fog, Sushenshin took the time to shout to the girl with short chestnut-colored hair named Anelita. And Louise, you should leave as well. I probably won't be able to take care of you in the upcoming battle. The girl, who was frightened by the battle between him and the black fog, immediately came back to her senses. She carried the still moaning Saintess and Louise, who kept looking back and left the scene together. On the other hand, the Queen of the West, who was still brooding over the empty grave of Sewell Adrian, did not leave. Instead, she remained at the scene, although she had changed from standing on the ground to flying in the air with her huge bat wings spread wide. That way, she would be able to avoid many accidental injuries from the shockwaves of the battle. Sushenshin had a general understanding of the other party's reluctance to leave. From the looks of the current situation, the figure in the black fog might really be the corpse of the missing Seve Adrian. If that was the case, Sushenshin could somewhat understand the reason why he was on par with the other party in his current state. After all, the other party was the him of this world and the savior of this world. Even if the other party was a little weaker than him, it was probably not that much weaker. If that was the case with his current state, if he continued to fight with the other party with a half-assed mentality, he might really lose. That was why he had dismissed Louise and the church duo, who were of no help. If it was possible, it would be best if the Queen of the West did not stay. But there was no time to continue persuading the stubborn vampire queen. He could only hope that she would fend for herself in the future. Sushenshin dispersed the cloud scales on his body and stood expressionlessly where he was. Although the cloud scales could help him with many things, they were actually more of a limiter, limiting Sushenshin's strength to a level where he could live normally in this world. When Sushenshin got serious, the cloud scales, which were harder than any metal on Earth, became a burden instead. This did not change even when Sushenshin was weakened by 1,000 times. First, the appetizer. Almost as soon as the word appetizer came out of his mouth, Sushenshin had already appeared in front of the black fog without warning. The side of the sky island he was standing on collapsed directly when he stepped forward. From a little distance, the sky island, which originally looked like a saucer, was directly broken in 2/3. Then Sushenshin's fist easily penetrated the layer of black fog that could erode all matter in this world and pollute the minds of all living creatures, and imprinted the face of his fist on the other party's face. Unlike the previous attack where almost all of the force was absorbed by the other party, the power this time was simply too strong. The space at the edge of the black fog seemed to have been pulled to its limit, and there was a strange stretching and wrinkling feeling. The person in the black fog was directly hit and flew out. The space behind him seemed to be torn apart by an invisible giant sword, and visible black space-time cracks and void turbulence appeared everywhere. In the end, the aftermath of the power of the fist broke through the shattered space and blew away all the thick clouds over the floating island. For a time, the sky was restored to a cloudless and unusually clear state. But all this was not over. From the point of Sushenshin's fist as the starting point, the world itself gradually began to show signs of collapse. Almost in a breath, the entire floating island was shrouded in the domain of collapse. Tisk, it's a bit too much. Even the initiator, Sushenshin, could not help but feel a little embarrassed. This world itself had experienced a considerable disaster, and the stability of space was a little worse than that of Earth. With such a serious punch, the original balance was naturally broken. Wow, what is this? Even the Queen of the West, who had tried to stay away from the battlefield, was still shrouded in the collapse of the world in midair, and was a little flustered for a moment. "Don't panic, I'll be right there." Su Shenxing hurriedly planned to do a standing long jump and jump over to save the other party from the collapse. However, at this moment, the person shrouded in the black fog appeared in front of him again. It was as if this punch, which could even collapse the world, did not even cause much damage to him. Su Shenxing could not help but feel a little anxious. Although he did not like the arrogant Queen of the West, she had at least entertained him and Louise in the castle, and he could not let her die in the turbulence of the collapse of the world. But for a moment he could not figure out what the guy in the black fog was. Even the Demon King of Doom would be stunned for a long time after being hit by his punch. At this moment, Su Shenxing noticed that the broken crystal tablet not far away suddenly shattered into countless crystal fragments, and then the fragments released many light spots. The next moment, the world behind the Queen of the West, who was shrouded in starlight, cracked open. But the Queen herself did not die from the explosion of void energy, and was instead rescued by someone who carried her in a princess carry. It was a person who appeared from the crack behind her. He was wearing a black mage robe with a hood, and had slightly messy spiky short hair. His facial features were identical to Su Shenxing's. "It's been a long time since we last met, but you're still so unlucky, Sharon." The other party turned a blind eye to Su Shenxing's situation. Instead he smiled and teased the vampire queen. "Huey, you're not dead." The latter looked as if she had seen a ghost, and her queenly demeanor disappeared without a trace. "It'll take some time to explain, so let me deal with the current situation first." The man smiled and waved his hand, and the collapse of the world stopped abruptly. Then, as if a rewind button had been pressed, everything quickly returned to normal. Looking at the confused Su Shenxing, the man ignored the black fog and took the initiative to greet him. "Nice to meet you. Although you probably know who I am, please allow me to introduce myself," he said. "I am the guardian of this world, Shiwei Adrian." Chapter 597. "Come to think of it, it's really rare to see a self as unique as you," Shiwei Adrian said, his gaze sweeping over Su Shenxing's head. "Are you trying to pick a fight?" Although Su Shenxing wanted to ask, "Aren't you dead?" when he thought about it carefully, it wasn't unthinkable that he could live for 1,000 years in another world. In fact, it would be strange if he couldn't live that long. He was the type of person who said, "You're so embarrassing, just leave the group." It wasn't that Su Shenxing had too much self-awareness, but with Shiwei Adrian and Su Shenxing included, all of them basically weren't normal people. Each of them had the power to shatter the saying that humans have limits. To put it in a more modern way, Su Shenxing in every world seemed to have something similar to a protagonist's aura, and I don't think now's the time to have a peaceful chat. Su Shenxing turned back to look at the humanoid monster shrouded in black mist, before turning to the one called Shiwei. At first Su Shenxing had thought that it was a monster that was using his own body to reincarnate, but now that he was here it was obvious that his guess was wrong. "You're right." Shiwei put the vampire girl aside. "It's going to be troublesome if you people collapse this world after so much trouble. Do you recognize this thing?" Just as Su Shenxing asked Shiwei, the black fog monster had already charged at him and clashed with him. But this time Su Shenxing wasn't as serious as before. After all, there was another him who he didn't know if was friend or foe watching from the sidelines. "I guess you could say that," Shiwei replied after staring at the black fog for a moment. Then Shiwei spread his arms and a mysterious pressure shrouded the entire place. The monster in the black fog was directly pressed to the ground, leaving a human-shaped imprint on the hard stone. "You might not like the sound of that, but I'm afraid you can't win against this monster." The other party seemed to still have some strength left. He was actually able to chat cheerfully with Su Shenxing. "It's not that I'm not strong enough. In fact, in terms of destructive power, even the current you is not below me. But this monster isn't so easily defeated." "What the hell are they?" Indeed, Su Shenxing was quite displeased with the other party's tone of concluding that he could not defeat the black fog monster. But the reality was as such. Even if Su Shenxing was serious in this state and even removed the cloud scale as a limiter, he still could not cause any decisive damage to the other party. The punch that could even destroy the world just now had only caused the black fog around the other party to shrink by a little. "It is the aftermath of the Age of Destruction." Shiwei's expression was solemn as he spoke slowly with great solemnity. "You'll die if you don't." Su Shenxing cursed in his heart. Don't underestimate this thing just because it's just the aftermath. It was something more profound and ancient than the origin of the world. Before I met this thing, I always thought that the void was the end of everything, including time, space, and concepts. Compared to the singularity that gave birth to everything, it was the focus of all existence. But in truth, the so-called age of destruction is the true form of that thing, and not limited to this world, but the true end of everything in the multiverse. Even as he spoke, Shi Adrian clenched his right fist, and the existence known as the apocalypse shockwave was utterly destroyed, revealing the mangled flesh within. However, one could still tell that it was the corpse of the short and stout grave robber who had summoned the black fog. What you did is completely different from what you said. Is this a demonstration to me? Su Shenxing immediately frowned because of the other party's behavior. First emphasizing that a certain existence was awesome, and then killing it instantly was a common way of showing off. I could destroy it not because I'm much stronger than you, but simply because I've experienced the age of destruction. You can understand it that way, but only those who have experienced it or are currently experiencing it can truly touch and resist the age of destruction after understanding the end of all things: time, space, energy, and concepts. The other party indicated that he had no intention of showing off, but there was a vague sense that he was showing off between his words. Just as Su Shenxing was about to say or do something to stop the other party from showing off, the vampire queen who had been put down not far away moved first. She didn't care that she was wearing a more formal dress and ran towards Seve Adrian. The latter smiled and opened his arms to her. Then the Queen of the West punched him in the face. "You bastard! Come out if you're not dead. How do you think we survived for 1,000 years? After the punch, the Queen of the West, who had looked incomparably cold, burst into tears. "Everyone's dead. Even the Academy doesn't exist anymore." An apologetic smile appeared on Shi Adrian's face. At first, old Su thought that he would be watching a tragic drama of the Jade School, but he didn't expect that in the cemetery not far away, the same black mist would emerge from the corpses of the gravediggers that had been swallowed by the black mist. Probably under the influence of the black mist, the corpses of the gravediggers that had died rather miserably stood up like undead creatures. There were more than 20 of them, and although they were weaker than the first one, they weren't that much weaker. With the advantage in numbers and the ability to ignore Su Shenxing's fists, as Shi had mentioned, it was going to be a fierce battle. You don't have to do anything against these guys. But Shi Adrian didn't seem worried at all. "It just so happens that I have something to explain as well." "What?" Su Shenxing, who had been rubbing his hands in anticipation, was stunned. In the world we live in, when a person breaks through to a certain realm, they can comprehend abilities that ordinary cultivators can't achieve. "We call it a miracle," Shi said slowly. "As a transmigrator from a modern society devoid of any mysteries, I possess a miracle that can eliminate all supernatural beings and powers. It's not scientific at all. At the same time, I'm essentially a different person compared to before I transmigrated, which is why I've obtained an additional miracle: double existence." "What?" Su Shenxing was confused by his words. "Don't panic. What's next is the main topic. Because I led everyone from Audiobook Academy and some other colleagues to save this world, I came to an agreement with the Chaos Vortex and obtained a new miracle. It is a miracle that can elevate me and the heroes of the Adrian Academy to a higher existence." As he spoke, the color of the sky behind him gradually became strange, and then became a color that spread a mysterious radiance like the stars. Many figures could be seen in the midst of this mystical color. Su Shenxing even saw the mayor of the city that he had met not long ago in Luomosai, the girl named Theo. "The third miracle has begun. Praise our great cause and victory. Descend, Adrian's throne of heroes." Chapter 598. The colors of the sky and earth gradually faded, finally sinking into the endless darkness of the night along with the world around them. In this world of nothingness, only the radiance of the nebula remained, and a crystal throne slowly appeared from within. It was like the palace of the gods, filled with a sense of holiness, mystery, and inviolability. Just by standing on the edge of the sky, the nothingness was filled with an indescribable sense of majesty. Without needing to test it out, Su Shenxing was sure that the crystal throne was much sturdier than this world. At the very least he was not confident that he could destroy it with a single blow since his power had been greatly reduced. At the same time, Su Xinxing, who had once destroyed a world for some reason, could also feel that the throne had already transcended the boundaries of a normal world, reaching the level of self-consistency. The reason it continued to rely on this world was purely to use itself as the last barrier to protect this world. After that, the people in the nebula began to materialize. There was a female swordswoman with the silhouette of a winged angel floating behind her back, a female mage with fiery red hair, a female puppet master controlling several small puppets, a female warrior wielding long and short swords, a cute girl dressed as a maid for some reason, and the mayor of Luomosai with a paralyzed face. By the way, why are they all women? There really is something wrong with me in this world. Although that was what he said, there were also men who appeared later on, such as a priest with a ghostly right hand, a spearman riding a sapphire dragon, a dragon slayer wielding a flame-shaped great sword, a blind youth with a guardian spirit floating behind him, and so on. However, women still made up the majority. We won't lose if we're comparing numbers. As if he did not hear Su Xinxing's retort, Shiwei Adrian spoke nonchalantly. The vampire queen, who was standing not far behind him, was in a state of shock. Clearly, the people who appeared from the nebula were her friends who had passed away in the last 1,000 years, and some of them even greeted her as they passed by. So what's going on? After a long moment of confusion, the vampire queen grabbed Shiwei's collar and asked loudly, "Didn't I explain it just now? This is the third miracle where I use myself as the foundation to upgrade the heroes who participated in saving the world into heroic spirits after their deaths. Adrian's heroic spirit throne." Sylvie, who was being rocked back and forth at nearly Mach 1, answered innocently. But, if that's the case, why didn't you tell me in advance? The mature and noble vampire queen was now like a little girl. If that's the case, wouldn't I look like an idiot after being sad over their deaths for so long? Then Su Xinxing saw a rather blatant expression of surprise on her other self's face. But the moment the vampire queen raised her head, her other self immediately returned to her serious expression. Su Xinxing couldn't help but sigh. No matter which world he was in, he was still the best actor. No, before that, you bastard, you should have come back earlier. But the vampire queen was already on the verge of tears. Why did you make me wait for 1,000 years? Finally, the expression of the guy named Seve Adrian turned serious. I'm sorry, Shalon. Although we successfully avoided the Age of Destruction in that war. No, before the war began I realized one thing. My existence is quite special and could even trigger the Age of Destruction. That's why I chose to die a natural death after that. Sylvie Adrian sighed helplessly. After becoming a heroic spirit, although I could hide myself in the world barrier with the heroic spirit throne, if I were to show myself in the prime material plane, it would almost certainly trigger an information tide in the Sea of Ether, and trigger the Age of Destruction again. Actually, in order to prevent the appearance of the information tide, apart from Eliza who can observe the soul domain, there shouldn't be anyone in this world who knows that I'm still alive. Yep, if this state can be considered alive. Then he added. Su Xinxing and the vampire queen wanted to say something, but that was when chaotic shouts came from the heroic spirits. Dean, this thing is the same as the Age of Destruction, we can't hold on much longer. Dorothy, take it, this is my last bit of mana. Damn, this is a tricky idea, Camille, help me. It's fine, Tanis. He'll be revived from the heroic spirit throne soon. It was only then that Su Xinxing realized that the heroic spirits who were ganging up on the black fog monsters were now at a disadvantage. Upon closer inspection, he realized that the black fog monsters seemed to have realized that they couldn't win with numbers alone, and so simply gathered together, fusing into an even larger black fog. Even if Su Xinxing couldn't see through the black fog, he could tell from the heroic spirits' battle against the Dahei fog that the black fog's true form had probably become a rather bizarre ball of flesh. Moreover, the damage reduction effect of that strange black mist was truly frightening. Although the heroic spirits were able to hurt their opponents just like Suel Adrian, even some of their more powerful attacks were reduced by the black mist, and the damage they dealt to their enemies was almost negligible after being reduced by the black mist. Looks like I'll have to train harder from now on. Seve Adrian sighed, speechless as he face-palmed. Surround that thing and don't let it escape, he said loudly. I'll take care of it myself. Then his gaze fell upon Su Xinxing. The essence of my next attack is to connect to the chaos vortex and correct all anomalies in the prime material plane. As one of the anomalies, you should be sent back to your original world. If there's anything you want to ask now, ask as soon as possible. That's good. Su Shinxing didn't beat around the bush and went straight to the point. From what you said just now, the Age of Destruction seems to be connected to you somehow. And since you dared to show yourself, does that mean there's no connection? To be precise, the Age of Destruction is connected to us. And according to my initial plan, the Age of Destruction wouldn't come to this world after you appeared, which is why I could show myself without worry. You're saying it as if the Age of Destruction is afraid of me, but why do I feel like you're implying something else? Su Shinxing looked at him with a half-smile. For example, I'm the Age of Destruction? Chapter 599. You're being paranoid. The Age of Destruction is not something a single person could become. Shiwei Adrian quickly denied Su Shinxing's theory. Although you don't appear to be in your normal state in front of me, I can see that your power is essentially the same as mine, which is why you wouldn't become the Age of Destruction. Su Shinxing stared at him for seconds before looking away. That's really good news, he said with a lackadaisical tone. I'm not interested in destroying worlds either. From that point of view, you're really a very orthodox me. Su Shinxing appeared to be very happy, but his words sounded as awkward as a malady. What do you mean? Su Shinxing was puzzled. Before I knew of the Age of Destruction, I had met many us from other worlds, and some of them even held a certain degree of hostility against me. But when the Age of Destruction truly came, they did not allow it to destroy their worlds, but instead used all of their abilities to try and save their worlds. Perhaps because there was not much time left, Su Shinxing did not keep Su Shinxing in suspense, and instead told him about his past and experiences. I think that's the main reason why infinite worlds would choose us to transmigrate and gain power. No matter what sorrows we experience or how heavy our fate is, as long as it's me or me, we would always choose to save the world. Su Shinxing did find it interesting when he put it that way. In his past experience, there were times when there was no need to save some worlds, but he would still act as a savior to defeat the Demon King's army, saving and liberating those worlds. Just like the more than 9,000 lattice worlds in the past, the fastest and safest way to cut off the power supply of the great demonic realm was to destroy the worlds that were still in the shape of crystal balls from the outside. But Su Shinxing and the others still chose to enter those small worlds to complete their mission as heroes. Although some of the worlds were destroyed by Su Shinxing and the others due to operational errors. Now that he thought about it, he had clearly sensed the malice of the people he had saved before. He even had a vague premonition that they would betray and stab him in the back. In the beginning, the hot-blooded desire to save the world with a sense of justice gradually cooled down in the face of helpless and dirty reality. It seemed that those worlds were no longer worth saving. Even so, in the end they still resolutely chose to save those lattice worlds. In addition to the promise he had made to the deceased, the most fundamental reason was probably the instinctive sense of responsibility that was engraved in the depths of his soul. From this point of view, the self of every world might have the feeling of wanting to save the world. Sorry, I accidentally said too much. When people get old, they probably like to ramble on and on about useless things. As Shiwei chanted, the crystal world tree began to emit a dazzling radiance that filled the entire void. The huge black fog monster was like a snowman exposed to sunlight, and it began to melt at an extremely fast speed. When the black fog was completely gone, Su Shinxing's body gradually became transparent as well. Is there really nothing else to say? Shiwei asked Su Shinxing for confirmation one last time. Su Shinxing was silent for a moment before saying, I hope that you could help take care of Louise. I will. Shiwei agreed without hesitation. Just as Su Shinxing was about to disappear completely, Shiwei Adrian suddenly said, Don't lose to the Age of Destruction. Su Shinxing smiled. Who do you think I am? Ah, you're finally awake, Shinxing. The first thing he saw when he opened his eyes was Qin Xingyan's surprised smile. How long have I been asleep? Su Shinxing asked as he stretched lazily. Most of the morning. How do you feel now? The girl asked in concern. I'm fine, just a little hungry. That's good. You gave me a fright when you suddenly fainted. Qin Xingyan breathed a sigh of relief, but then noticed that Su Xinxing's expression was a little off. What happened? He asked worriedly. I had a very long dream. Su Xinxing sighed. My heart felt heavy. Is that so? Do you mind telling me what the dream was about? That's not a problem, but I'm a little hungry now. Before Su Xinxing could finish, Emily suddenly ran out of the kitchen with a casserole on his head. He placed the casserole in front of Su Xinxing with a clang. Mr. Landlord, this is the porridge I made. Although he was happy that this girl was finally a little more sensible and knew how to make some food for him. But the problem was that the strange and evil liquid in the void didn't seem to be something that could be called porridge, no matter how he looked at it. Would he faint for half a day after eating this? Su Xinxing couldn't help but worry about his future. Chapter 600. Ying, do you know about the ghost story that's been circulating around the school recently? Not long after school started, a girl who was close to Cui Ying asked her mysteriously. There's something like a ghost story in our school. Cui Ying was shocked. After all, she herself had a series of supernatural experiences. In her opinion, even if there were unclean things like demons and monsters in this school, there was an 80% chance that they would be hammered to death by her friend Jasmine. If Emily couldn't handle it, there was still that mysterious landlord. Of course there are, and there are surprisingly many of them. The girl's face was full of surprise. For example, last semester's most famous mysterious disappearance of food from the cafeteria. Almost a ton of food suddenly disappeared under the surveillance camera. Experts have verified that the surveillance camera wasn't tampered with, and the real culprit is still a mystery. We don't even know what kind of crime the culprit used, other than this is an incredible supernatural event. There is no other explanation. It's Emily, and last semester's quite famous video game ghost incident in school. The IT teacher had forgotten something in the school, so he came in the middle of the night to retrieve it. In the end, he saw that all the computers in the school's computer lab were turned on, and every computer was running a popular online game at the time. The characters in the computers had even formed a guild called Nest Demon King Money Farming, and were fighting against other guilds in the game. But there was no one in the computer room, it was too scary. It's Emily again. And last semester's super famous resentful spirit incident after school that almost made it to the newspapers. At that time, every evening after school, the last person to leave would hear the sound of "Landlord, I hate you." And for some reason they couldn't find the source of the sound. Almost 100 people have encountered this phenomenon. It can be said that it's a publicly recognized supernatural event. Isn't this still Emily? It would be better to say that no one could tell from that super representative self-description. Cui Ying suddenly felt tired. So what's the latest incredible ghost story? Oh, did that spirit do something strange again? Ying, why do you think these things are all done by the same spirit? The girl asked curiously. Intuition. Cui Ying replied resolutely. The girl, who was overwhelmed by Cui Ying's presence, had no choice but to continue with the latest rumor. The latest ghost story is not this kind of wandering spirit at school, but a cursed Blu-ray disc that is inhabited by evil spirits. That's Sadako, right? And it feels like it's been out of date for many years. Cui Ying couldn't help but complain. I wasn't even born when that movie was released. Speaking of which, why is it a blue light? Could it be that even ghosts can keep up with the times? I feel like something's not quite right. However, according to my friend's classmate's uncle's nephew's classmate's friend, a victim has already been born. The other party said mysteriously. Isn't this relationship back to square one? Maybe that uncle has two nephews. Cui Ying, you're right. I have nothing to say. She sorted out her thoughts. In other words, the victim's story hasn't been proven yet? Perhaps even the existence of that blue light plate is a problem. About that blue light. Clang clang. The other party used her mouth to add the sound effect of a prop from Doraemon while taking out a very crudely packaged Blu-ray disc from her chest. It's here. Why would you bring something like this with you? No, wait, where did you put it before this? Cleavage. Cui Ying was shocked. Today the girl's worldview had been greatly impacted. I saw the boys showing this off over there, so I took it. The girl, who didn't look like a middle school student, said with a wicked smile. Cui Ying's face was full of helplessness. Then have you seen it? No, the other party answered matter-of-factly. I didn't dare to see it, so I gave it to you. Are you treating me like a lab rat? Don't give me that kind of expression. Those stinky boys were fine after seeing it, so it's probably just a rumor. Plus, you're the hero who was able to tame the Demon King Emoli. This kind of small thing shouldn't be a problem for you. So Emoli is actually quite cute. Why are you all so afraid of him? That cute one is only on the outside. If he's Godzilla on the inside, then spare me. Forget it, let's not talk about this anymore. The other party seemed to be afraid of Emoli's topic. She stuffed the Blu-ray disc into Cui Yingying's arms and quickly left. Tomorrow, remember to tell me what's inside the disc. Cui Yingying could only sigh helplessly. She placed the transparent box with the disc on the table, then poked at the box and called out tentatively in a soft voice. Emoli? What's the matter? In the end, Jasmine popped out from behind her and asked. The frightened Cui Yingying made a strange sound. When did you get there? When the flat brackets appear. Although I don't know what you're talking about, my intuition tells me that it's not something good. Cui Yingying looked at the Blu-ray disc again. Emoli, do you want to see this? I want to see. I don't have anything at home that can read Blu-ray discs. Emoli replied expressionlessly. However, Cui Yingying, who had recently become familiar with Emoli, noticed that the little girl seemed a bit depressed. I remember that you have a PS console in your apartment. Can't you use that to read the disc? Cui Yingying asked in confusion. Mushroom secretly took it back. Jasmine replied first. Then, as if she had thought of something, she added, Yes, speak. You still haven't given up on that habit of yours. Yes, Dezawa. There's even a new variant. Cui Yingying casually ridiculed, then thought for a moment. Speaking of which, I think I have a device at home that can read Blu-ray discs. Do you want to come over and see? What? Emoli raised both his hands. Although his expression didn't change, he gave off a feeling of very happy. So after sending a message to Su Shenxing, the two Lolas went to Cui Yingying's house to see the so-called cursed Blu-ray discs. Chapter 601. Cursed Blu-ray Disc? Su Shenxing looked at the serious expression on Xiao Jingyi's face and could not help but sigh. With pity in his voice, he said, Is your super admin office finally so incompetent that you've started to deal with this kind of thing? I also hope that this is just AF * king joke. Xiao Jingyi rubbed his face that was about to stiffen from maintaining the same expression. But based on the current situation, this might be real. Then why are you telling me this like you're telling a ghost story? Su Shenxing looked at him with condescension. Isn't this better for the atmosphere? Xiao Jingyi said sheepishly. And his actions did have a certain effect. At least Song Yu, who was there earlier, had already left Sakura Apartments under the banner of taking Dog Girl out for a walk. At the same time, Qin Xingyan walked to the window and pulled open the thick curtains. Instantly, the red rays of the setting sun once again flowed into the originally dark room. Combined with the family bucket and a pile of chicken bones in front of Su Shenxing, the hard-won horror from before was completely dispelled. When Emoli comes back and finds out that you've finished the whole bucket alone, she'll be very sad. The girl looked at the satisfied Su Shenxing and could not help but smile bitterly. It's okay. She's going to her classmate's house today, so she should be back late. By then I'll have already destroyed the body. After Su Shenxing said that, he turned to look at Xiao Jingyi. For the sake of Kaifeng. So, there's already a victim? He wiped his fingers with a napkin and asked curiously. Actually, there are some very strange things about this. Xiao Jingyi hesitated for a moment before saying, Actually, we received the news relatively late. At the time, this cursed Blu-ray disc ghost story had already been circulating in Jiangjin for quite some time. It's quite widespread, so I'm afraid many people have already seen the Blu-ray disc. Isn't the real body of that thing with you? Regarding this, Su Shenxing could not help but reveal a surprised expression. He thought that the group of people from the super administrative office were unable to deal with the curse on the blue light, so they came to ask for his help. But that's hard to say. Xiao Jingyi looked like he was troubled by how to explain this to Su Shenxing. You see, these kinds of ghost stories are cursed after reading them, right? However, in this kind of ghost story, there would normally be a method to remove the curse. It's diffusion, right? After hearing what he said, Su Shenxing understood. However, Qin Xingyan, who had just entered the secular world to cultivate, looked confused. Bread? Well, to make an analogy, it's probably the people who watch this video will die. If you want to live, you have to copy it and show it to a certain number of people. Su Xinxing patiently explained to her. Fortunately, the girl was quite smart. She immediately understood what he was saying and deduced many other things. I understand now. It's actually a variant of the if you don't repost you're not XXX in Weibo, right? Or it's more or less the same. Although Su Xinxing felt that there should be a subtle difference between things like reposting koi and this thing, because he did not want to continue explaining, he wisely chose to brush it off. If the two of you are done whispering intimately, Xiao Jingyi coughed dryly to get Su Xinxing and Qin Xingyan's attention back to him. Then I'll continue with the main topic. Intimately. Qin Xingyan's face turned red. Su Xinxing's expression did not change. He just waited for Xiao Jingyi to continue. As of now, there are no victims. Xiao Jingyi looked at Su Xinxing's fierce eyes. He immediately cleared his throat and continued, but there are related victims. Are they injured? Or is he unconscious or something like that? Qin Xingyan's curiosity was piqued. Perhaps it was because he had never encountered such an incident since his debut. It's the former. Xiao Jingyi's expression became serious. Xiao Qing and I once went door to door to investigate the families of the victims who were said to be involved in the cursed blue light supernatural incident. We also learned some things from some of the people involved. Perhaps he was thirsty from talking, or perhaps he just wanted to liven up the atmosphere. He paused for a moment and picked up the teacup in front of him with his unhealed right hand. After taking a sip of tea, he continued. According to the people involved, after the Blu-ray is released, the first thing that will be shown is some irrelevant scenes. Some are advertisements, some are games, some are talk shows, and some are TV dramas. In short, if you stop at this stage, nothing will happen. However, if you continue to watch, what if? Qin Xingyan swallowed a mouthful of saliva. First of all, the brightness of the TV screen will start to dim inexplicably. Then there will be flickering images and large snowflakes. Wait a minute. Su Xinxing, who had been calm from the beginning, suddenly spoke. Qin Xingyan was startled. Blue light equipment is usually connected to LCD TVs, right? When I worked in the shopping mall over there, I learned that modern LCD TVs are different from the old TV at home. Even if the channel can't be received, there won't be large snowflakes. It should be a blue screen. For some reason, he seemed to be very proud of his work in the shopping mall. That's the problem. Xiao Jingyi continued, but his voice was getting deeper and deeper. His tone became more and more sinister. After that, the entire TV screen will be distorted. A strange dark red color will appear on the screen like flesh and blood. The scene inside will also be distorted because of the distortion. No matter what is being broadcasted before, it will become as tragic as Avicii. Finally, Qin Xingyan was very engrossed in listening. In the end, the blue light equipment will burn due to the overload that is theoretically impossible to achieve. Why is it that we were talking about TVs just now, but the blue light equipment is the unlucky one in the end? Su Xinxing couldn't help but complain. According to the routine, shouldn't there be something crawling out of the TV? Because it's the blue light disc that's being cursed. Maybe that thing's magical power is limited and can only affect the blue light equipment. Xiao Jingyi tried to guess. Now that you've mentioned it, no matter what the culprit is, it's going to be a lowly one. According to the bureau chief, Su Feng, 90% of the incidents that our super administrative office handles are of the low-level type. On the other hand, Jiang Jin is too abnormal. If it's not a large-scale invasion of foreign demons and ghosts, it's a situation at the level of immortals fighting. Our super administrative office can't do anything other than clean up the aftermath. Xiao Jingyi said with an embarrassed expression. You have to enjoy the process. In this regard, Su Xinxing, who didn't know if it was because of his protagonist aura, could only laugh dryly and comfort him. Maybe there will be the end of the world soon. You're not comforting me at all. You're making me even more worried. What the hell is the end of the world? 2012 is already over. Xiao Jingyi, who accidentally heard some shocking secret, was in a bad mood. Don't panic, let's continue to talk about the curse. Sigh, anyway, even if the end of the world is really coming, I can't help much. Xiao Jingyi became even more depressed. He simply said, in short, after the blue light equipment burns out, the victims will feel that there is always something around them. In fact, there is indeed some kind of invisible thing following them and constantly exerting pressure on them on a psychological level. At first, because of the pressure, they will overeat, then indescribable irritation and fear of flowing water, then continuous and uncontrollable rage, and then they will start to self-harm. The injuries I mentioned before are basically the same situation. After the impulse to self-harm passes, there will be a short cooling-off period. This is the sage period. Don't be ridiculous. After the cooling-off period, if they still don't copy the disc to others, the symptoms on the disc will repeat, and the situation will be more serious than the first time. Xiao Jingyi sighed. For those who haven't survived the second round, the victims will basically complete the diffusion requirement during the first or second cooling-off period. After that, the symptoms caused by the curse will slow down and disappear within a day. Instead of calling it a curse, it feels more like some kind of strange infectious disease. Qin Xingyan speculated. Indeed, diseases like rabies would also have symptoms such as fear of water, anxiety, and irritation. To be honest, if it's just these symptoms, then it's fine. The key problem is that after we organized a physical examination of the victims, the results showed that parts of their bodies were missing. It's not the tissue that was missing during the onset of the disease, but something more subtle like congenital defects that disappeared directly. For example, if the defect is in the heart, the ventricular wall will be slightly thinner than normal people's. If the defect is in the large intestine, the intestine will be slightly shorter than normal people's. However, because the defect is very small, nothing has happened so far. Probably only people with defects such as the eyeballs will have blurred vision. Xiao Jingyi's face darkened. Then there's the main point. According to the statistical integration of the defect, the total mass of the defect is roughly enough to piece together a person. For a moment, Sakura's apartment was shrouded in a strange silence. If I'm not wrong, Xiao Jingyi finally concluded his words. Now there might be one more person in Jiangjin City who originally didn't exist. Chapter 602. Cui Yingying's father was working overtime as usual, so she only needed to prepare dinner for herself and Mo Li. Cui Yingying did not go to the nearby Costco supermarket with Mo Li because she was very concerned about that plate of blue light. Instead, she bought 2 lunches from a 24-hour convenience store on her way home from school. What's the matter, Mo Li? After Cui Yingying paid, she found Mo Li staring at the transparent crisper beside the counter. What is that? The little girl pressed her finger against her lips and tilted her a hogue as she asked. Cui Yingying followed her line of sight and found that she was looking at the roasted sweet potato in the crisper. That's right, it's already autumn. She couldn't help but ask Mo Li curiously, Mo Li, have you never seen a sweet potato before? Sweet potato. The little girl thought for a moment, and then showed an expression of sudden realization. As expected, things like sweet potatoes should be quite common. A distant relative of landmines? That's not right. You obviously know about landmines, but you don't know about sweet potatoes? That's the monster Dezawa that can fight evenly with Bichimos. What's that? And that idiom is enough. Could it be the holy fruit that gives you unlimited magic power after eating it? Who is it? Who the hell instilled in you this kind of cliché that few readers can understand? It seemed that Mo Li really didn't know about sweet potatoes. Cui Yingying confirmed in her mind. Of course, I can't rule out the possibility that he was taught some strange knowledge by someone. Could it be? Mo Li swallowed his saliva. This is very delicious. If you have to choose between delicious and not delicious, it should be considered delicious. Cui Yingying didn't have any special fondness for roasted sweet potatoes. They belonged to the type that she would only eat on a whim. However, according to her taste that was no different from that of normal women, the sweet and soft roasted sweet potato could indeed be classified as delicious. Jasmine turned her head and stared at Cui Yingying with pitiful puppy-like eyes that were filled with pleading, causing the latter to feel a ton of guilt. All right, I'll buy it for you, so don't look at me like that. Cui Yingying, who was soft-hearted to begin with, quickly compromised. Mo Li cheered in her distinctive, soft, emotionless voice. Mo Li's influence is making me want to try it out. In the end, Cui Yingying, who paid for 2 roasted sweet potatoes again, couldn't help but sigh. The cashier's gentle expression as if she was looking at a pair of close sisters acting coquettishly made her lose the mood to even explain. What should I do with so many extra calories? Oh. So bad. Mo Lee, who was standing at the side, clearly wasn't afraid of calories. Instead, he exclaimed about the roasted sweet potatoes with an attitude as if he had discovered a new continent. However, because his mouth was stuffed with food, his speech was slurred. Cui Yingying peeled off the aluminum foil and pried open the perfectly roasted sweet potato, revealing the tender yellow and fragrant contents. Because she was afraid of the heat, she only carefully took a bite. Then she couldn't help but mutter in a low voice, "Although it's indeed very delicious. Because it's very hot, Jasmine, you have to be careful when you eat." In the end, when she turned her head, she found that Mo Lee's hands had nothing left, including the skin of the sweet potato and the aluminum foil. Mo Lee, don't tell me you even ate the skin and the aluminum foil? You can't eat those too. Mo Lee, who was licking his fingers, froze for a moment, then pretended to be serious and replied, "The flavor is very unique, I suggest you try it." No way. Humans can't digest that kind of thing. Cui Yingying couldn't help but ridicule. By the way, Mo Lee, are you really okay? Do you need me to contact Sakura Apartments' landlord? It's fine. Mo Lee didn't mind at all. Compared to the dragon-slaying sword, this is much easier to digest. Just say it. At this moment, Cui Yingying felt that if she continued to pay attention to Mo Lee's previous recipes, her sanity might start to decrease. For the sake of her mental health, she decided to pretend that she didn't hear what he said just now. After eating their lunch, what came next was the main business of the day. Mo Lee sat on Cui Yingying's bed and curiously stared at the TV. Cui Yingying took out the CD from the CD case and put it into the DVD player that was said to be able to read Blu-ray discs. After a moment, the TV with the signal set up appeared on the TV screen. Amazing, Lord Zero can actually do something like this. No. It's going to break, my Zero is going to break. It looked like Ivy's. Cui Yingying's face turned red as she used her remaining willpower to pick up the remote control and sped it up at 32 times the normal speed. After a few minutes. As we can't. Patrice, go. This time it looked like calcium tablets. How is this a curse? That guy was definitely tricked by those bastard boys. Cui Yingying's entire body felt unwell because she saw a rather unsightly scene. Mo Lee continued to use pure and curious eyes to look at the two brawny men wrestling on the screen. Ugh, I feel like I've been defiled. Mo Lee, don't look anymore. Cui Yingying let out a long sigh and picked up the remote control to turn off the device. That's right, how can there be so many incredible things in this world? But before she could press the button, the image on the TV screen began to change. First, the image began to flicker strangely, then large patches of snowflakes began to appear on the screen. It was like an old TV with bad reception during the CRT era. The startled Cui Yingying subconsciously pressed the standby button on the remote control. But the image was still in a state of bad reception. Not only did the CD player in the TV cabinet not go into hibernation mode, but it also vibrated slightly and made a strange sound. It was probably the feeling of some kind of liquid boiling in the DVD player's casing. Then, the distorted image became even stranger. It even seemed like blood was seeping out from the screen. Gradually, the entire image was filled with an uncomfortable bright red. Accompanying this strange change was a hair-raising, ear-piercing sound effect from the TV speakers. What's going on? Cui Yingying, who was not mentally prepared, was stunned. Jasmine, who had been indifferent until now, finally raised her small face as if she had sensed something. Her small and delicate nose twitched for a moment, and then she furrowed her brows in an imperceptible manner. Strange smell. Chapter 603. It's true. Cui Yingying, who had been scared out of her wits, regained her senses and smelled a burnt stench. But she soon found the source of the smell. The Blu-ray device that looked like a DVD player had stopped vibrating and was now sizzling with smoke. There was a high possibility that the insides of the device had been burned down for some unknown reason. Her rationality told her that she should pull the plug quickly to prevent a fire. But the strange scene on the screen and the occasional electric sparks from the Blu-ray device made her a little scared. It's not that smell, can't you see? Emoli sat on the bed with his arms crossed in front of his chest. He closed his eyes and pretended to be deep in thought. Then he slammed his fist as if he had thought of something. Emoli, what are you doing? Then Emoli ignored Cui Yingying's scream and used his hands to cover the latter's eyes. After a while he let go of his hands. Geez, you scared me. Before Cui Yingying could finish complaining, her voice suddenly stopped. Because there was a face right in front of her. Well, let's call it a face. It was a pale, skinny, bloodless face. The face was covered with strange wrinkles that were obviously different from the wrinkles of an old person. Its right eye was sunken and there was no eyeball at all. At first glance one could see the white bones at the edge of the eye socket. Its left eye was raised high and the pupil was pitifully small. The white of the eye occupied most of the eye and was filled with a sense of madness that would make one's scalp tingle. It had no nose, only two black triangular holes like a skull. The corners of its mouth were cracked all the way to its ears. The part where the lips should have been was gone and in its place were bright red gums and uneven teeth. At this moment, this thing that could not be called a face was less than 20 centimeters away from Cui Yingying and it grinned at the girl. So the girl's eyes rolled back and she fainted. Probably realizing that he had done something bad, Emoli blinked and let out a short and flat cry. Because Cui Yingying had fainted too quickly, she did not know that the face was actually growing on top of a cloud-like object. Furthermore, there were dozens of similar faces growing on top of that cloud-like object. Right now the eyeballs of those faces were all looking at Jasmine. If it was anyone else, even if they were not afraid of ghosts, they would probably feel their scalp tingle from being stared at by so many pairs of eyes. However, Jasmine didn't feel anything at all. Instead, she looked at the burnt blue light equipment. The cloud of mist had come from the blue light equipment. Until now, the milky white fog was still pouring out, was still growing. It was growing larger and larger. Although Jasmine didn't know how this thing worked, in reality this type of ghost was like an echo wall, constantly reflecting and amplifying the emotions of the person it was looking at. For example, Cui Yingying's first reaction when she saw the face was fear. In fact, most people's first reaction when they saw that thing was similar. Then her fear was continuously reflected by the object. In the end, the fear was too much for her to bear. Under the safety mechanism of the human brain, she fainted. If not for this, a ghost face alone would not be able to scare people until they fainted. After all, a human's psychological endurance was often much stronger than one could imagine. After that, the ghost obviously wanted to repeat the same trick on Emoli. But when it started to reflect Emoli's emotions, it felt that something was wrong. If Cui Yingying's emotion was so scary, then Emoli's emotion looks like cotton candy. I want to eat it, I don't know if it tastes good. After the reflection, Cui Yingying's emotion was unparalleled fear. Emoli's emotion was it really is cotton candy. I really want to eat it. It must be delicious. And so, under the gaze of the ghost faces, Emoli swallowed his saliva. The ghosts were silent for a moment. Then, as if time was rewinding, the smoke that had already filled half of the room rushed back into the blue light device. It ran away. Emoli, who did not manage to eat it, looked very disappointed. A little girl with a gloomy expression walked on the streets of Jiangjin. More than half of the cursed discs that she had sent out to collect human tissue had been destroyed by the super-administrative office. The rest of the discs had either been thrown in a corner without anyone noticing, or the owner had no intention of looking at them. What made her even more upset was that a strand of her soul had almost been eaten physically by a little girl who was even weirder than herself. No, if this continued, this body would start to rot. Then everything she had done before would be in vain. She had to complete the body before it rotted. Can I only use a slightly more radical method? The reason why she spread the cursed discs was because her main body had previously resided in the discs. Secondly, it was a safety measure. She would not encounter any powerful people who would instantly purify her. But now that her main body had been transferred to this body and she had spread the discs in Jiangjin, she had more or less figured out that there were no temples in Jiangjin. Even the nearest Bailu temple was more than 10 kilometers away. It should be fine if her actions were a little more radical. As she thought about it, she saw a young man walking slowly with a plastic bag in his hand not too far away. She showed a flirtatious smile and quickly ran to his side. She hugged the young man and buried her face in his chest. "Big brother, save me. Someone was chasing me just now." "What? Who?" The young man looked confused. It's a bad guy with a scary face. The girl continued. Bad guy? Scary? The young man looked even more confused. Yes. The girl suddenly raised her face, revealing her scary face in her ghost form. It's a face that looks like this. Then she waited expectantly for the young man to feel scared. But the young man was only surprised for a moment. He frowned and suddenly shouted, Emperor. Then an indescribably terrifying pressure almost crushed the girl's vengeful spirit. She was so scared that she let go. She did not care about the loss of her magic power and the damage to her body. What's the matter? After that, the sword spirit of the Emperor's sword gradually appeared beside the young man. I met a demon just now. The young man was naturally Chintua, who had come out to buy things. But if it was scared away by you, it should only be a small demon, right? Too much. If you want to talk about the seniority of demons, it's at the level of a 1,000-year-old ghost. A small demon without a few hundred years of cultivation is no match for it. So, it's your fortune to be able to become the sword master of my generation. What kind of half-hearted answer is this? A sword spirit also has dignity. Do you want to eat chestnuts? Yes. The dignity of a sword spirit is really cheap. In a small alley not far away, the ghost girl who had escaped was curled up in a corner, trembling. As a spirit body, the Emperor's sword spirit's pressure on her was too strong. Even if she just stood beside the other party for a moment, there was a possibility that her soul would dissipate. I didn't expect that uncouth-looking young man to actually be a ghost tamer, and he's even raising a 1,000-year-old ghost. But if that's the case, my guess is correct. No one even cares about a 1,000-year-old ghost of that level. Other than the few mortals in the super administration office, there shouldn't be any other experts in this city. As long as I'm careful and don't meet that ghost tamer again, it won't be a problem to heal my body. Thinking of this, the ghost Loli, who was full of confidence, once again mustered up her energy. Chapter 604. After carefully avoiding the 1,000-year-old ghost and her ghost tamer, the ghost girl continued to wander aimlessly on the streets of Jiangjin. At first she was still a little worried, but after a long time, there were still no other ghost tamers or cultivators who appeared to take her in. This made her braver. This was not the first time she had transformed. In the past, when the CD was being spread in other cities, there would often be people who claimed to be the super administrator who would come and destroy the CD in large quantities not long after she transformed. They would also kill her, who had just transformed at the same time, so she could only barely escape back into the CD as a remnant of her soul to live on. However, this time was different. Although the people from the super administrative office had also destroyed the discs, they didn't come and find trouble with her. This made her confirm her guess. Sure enough, the ones maintaining order in this city were only those two mortals. It seemed that as long as she was careful of the 1,000-year-old ghost and the ghost tamer, she could live in this city without any worries. Thinking that her long-cherished wish of many years could finally be fulfilled, the ghost Loli suddenly felt a little elated. The pitiful little girl didn't know that the reason why Xiao Jingyi and the other members of the super administrative office didn't come and find trouble with her was purely because the instruments distributed by the super administrative office in Jiangjin were of the less sensitive type. They didn't have any reaction to a ghost with weak spiritual power like her. As for those instruments that detected supernatural forces, as long as they were slightly more sensitive, they would directly overload and burn due to Mo Li's existence. What should I do first after I come back to life? How about eating popcorn and watching a movie first? I've wanted to do that for a long time. Also, ice cream looks great, but it's almost winter now. I wonder what hamburgers taste like. It's so hard to decide. The ghost Loli's imagination ran wild as she searched for prey. However, because she didn't dare to walk on the bustling main roads, she chose to walk on the more remote paths near the outskirts of the city. In addition, the weather was getting colder, so there were almost no pedestrians on the road. After a long time, her eyes lit up as she found a suitable prey. It was an adult and a child walking hand in hand. The older girl looked to be in her 20s, but she seemed to be wearing some kind of evil warding treasure. With the lowly ghost's yin-yang eyes, most of her body was covered by a dazzling light. If it wasn't for the fact that she looked like a mortal, the lowly ghost would have turned around and fled. As for the little girl, who was about 12 or 13 years old, She didn't have anything that could ward off evil spirits. She was about the same age as the lowly ghost. If he wanted to collect the final fragment, she was undoubtedly the most suitable candidate. At this moment they were standing in front of a store that sold sexy underwear. The girl with the evil warding treasure hesitated for a while before saying to the little girl, "Chiketsu, I'm going in to buy something. Stay here and don't move." Probably because she was afraid that the other sex toys in the store would influence the pure and innocent little girl, the girl didn't intend to bring her in. The little girl nodded obediently. "Okay, big sister Song Yu." Thus, the young woman with the evil warding treasure walked into the shop, leaving the little girl alone at the entrance. What a heaven-sent opportunity. The lowly ghost couldn't help but be overjoyed. Because she was afraid of scaring away her prey, she simply turned into a spirit and quietly approached the other party. At this moment something strange happened. A British short-hair cat emerged from the little girl's shadow. Its yellow and orange eyes stared at the approaching lowly ghost. Due to his sudden appearance, even the lowly ghost was startled. Is it the same kind? The mutual reaction between spirits made her realize that the other party was also a spirit. As she calmed down. Although she was afraid of demons because of her cultivation, if the other party was just a spirit, then as long as it wasn't a 1,000-year-old ghost, everything would be fine. In the end, the British short-hair stood up in front of her stunned gaze. Then it curled its paws and made a fist. Although it was hard to believe, a cat really made its paws into a fluffy little fist in a way that defied biology. Moreover, the cat made a pose like a boxer. Without waiting for the lowly ghost to come back to her senses, the cat rushed forward and punched her chin with a rising dragon fist. Although the ghost was only a lowly compared to a cat, it was already huge. But at this moment she was sent flying by the cat's rising dragon fist. If it weren't for the fact that ordinary people couldn't see spirits, this scene would be like an exaggerated cartoon of a cat and a mouse, full of comical feeling. Woo! After the lowly ghost landed, she held her chin and let out a mournful cry. But then her heart burned with fighting spirit. It's just the spirit of a cat. How dare it be so arrogant? Then she waved her little fists and rushed towards the other party. In the end, the cat easily dodged her fist like a boxer and counterattacked, giving her a good beating. After losing to a cat with a huge score of 10-26-0, the lowly ghost whimpered, covered her beaten head and ran away. Wow, even my father can't beat me. What's wrong with that little girl? Song Yu, who came out of the shop after buying things, saw the lowly ghost running past and couldn't help but ask curiously, "I don't know either." Chiketsu, who didn't know that his guardian spirit had beaten up the other party, also shook his head in confusion. In the shadow behind her, the British shorthair acted as if nothing had happened. It nonchalantly used its tongue to comb the fur on its paws, then disappeared into the shadow. Woo! In the end, not only did I not get a fragment, I also lost a lot of magic power. Speaking of which, is that girl also a ghost tamer? Just how many ghost tamers are there in this city? The lowly ghost, who finally stopped crying, sniffled and held her deflated stomach, muttering pitifully. But since her body wasn't complete yet, she couldn't eat anything. If she wanted to fill her stomach, she could only do the same thing as other ghosts: absorb the life force of living things. As expected, wandering around the streets is too inefficient. Otherwise, I could just take the initiative and sneak into a random house. Even if I can't get a suitable fragment, I can at least absorb some life force. Thus, she thought for a while, then turned into a spirit and flew to the middle floor of a nearby apartment. She didn't choose the lower floor because she was afraid of being discovered by the ghost tamers again. If she flew too high, the wind would be a greater threat to her spirit, so it was better to go to the middle floor. Oh, is there no one in the house? There was no life force in the house, so it seemed that the owner hadn't returned home yet. How unlucky. But it seems like they have a pet. Forget it, anything will do. Anyway, let's absorb some life force first. Thus, the lowly ghost turned her gaze to herself and felt that the source of life force wasn't human. Then she stared blankly as a lizard very skillfully climbed out of the glass tank, then calmly nestled on the sofa, revealing its belly like a paralyzed Guyu. It used its tail to roll out the remote control from under the pillow, and used the tip of its tail to poke the standby button to turn on the television. Then it skillfully chose a drama about mother-in-law and daughter-in-law, and watched it with great interest. After a while, probably sensing the lowly ghost's gaze, the fat lizard turned its head and saw the lowly ghost, whose lower body had turned into smoke, floating outside the window looking at it blankly. The ghost and the lizard stared at each other for a moment. Chapter 605. Oh, was it just my imagination? Felt like the monster just now wasn't that powerful. After running for at least 3 kilometers and confirming that nothing was chasing after her, the ghost lowly finally let out a sigh of relief and began to recall the situation just now. Due to the fact that spirits were greatly countered by demons, and to most demons the so-called vengeful spirits were basically just supplements. Therefore, the spirits that had regained their intelligence were very afraid of demons, and the Lolita was naturally the same. Even if she had the same kind of ability as herself in the Bell, she was still just a vengeful spirit. In terms of grade, she couldn't even compare to the spirit ghosts in Sakura's apartment. Forget it, there's no benefit even if I beat the monster. Let's go. After continuing to wander the streets for a while, the ghost lowly suddenly felt a strange throbbing, or rather a sudden impulse. That strange feeling as if there was a voice in the unseen world, made her almost instinctively walk in a direction. A moment later she arrived in front of a high-rise apartment that was similar to the one from before. Although she didn't know what was inside, the feeling that made her jump for joy from the bottom of her heart made her unable to suppress it. She involuntarily turned into a spirit and passed through the glass door that required a swipe of a card, then floated up the stairs. Although she could directly fly through the ceiling to her destination, in the end her rationality made her prioritize preserving her magic power and chose to take the stairs. As for why she didn't take the elevator, it was purely because this ghost who had been dead for who knew how long and hadn't even eaten a hamburger didn't know that there was such a thing as a box elevator. After floating for a long time, she finally arrived at her destination, outside the door of an ordinary-looking apartment. At this point she already had a rough idea of what attracted her to this place. Spirituality. It didn't seem like something that could appear in this age of chaos. It was as if it was directly extracted from a spirit vein, incomparably pure and thick. Just like how catnip had a fatal attraction to most cats, pure spiritual chi had an irresistible attraction to ghosts. This kind of attraction to ghosts was even stronger than the life force they needed to survive. It was precisely because she felt this incomparably pure spiritual chi that the ghost lowly recklessly came here as if she was possessed. There was no human life force inside, but she couldn't rule out the existence of monsters. But if it was for the pure spiritual chi behind this door, the ghost lowly felt that even if she had to face a monster like that, she would probably have the courage to fight to the death. Thinking of this, she resolutely passed through the security door and crashed into the apartment. After a while it muttered, "If you don't want to listen, then don't want to listen. Why do you have to commit suicide? It's not good to hit the flowers and plants. This is a sign of not understanding Marxism and not having self-awareness. Alright, whose turn is it today?" Thus, the kitchen cabinets and cabinets tacitly moved their gazes away. Young people these days. Forget it, I'll wait for Xiao Jingyi to come back before I tell him. The ideology and politics textbook shook its cover and then crawled back to the bookshelf like a crab. Something was wrong. There was something wrong with this city. Other things aside, the number of monsters was too terrifying. The ghost lowly felt that she had lived for so long. No, she had died for so long, but she had never seen so many monsters. Could it be that without her noticing, the monsters had successfully counterattacked the humans and occupied the city? No matter what, she couldn't stay in this place anymore. This city is too strange. No, I have to go to another city to be haunted. The ghost lowly, who didn't feel that she was a strange existence, calmed herself down and made the decision to leave this city. However, because she was distracted, she didn't notice the strange situation of the buildings around her gradually increasing in size. Chapter 606. When her face hit a transparent wall, the lowly ghost, who was clutching her forehead and crying out in pain, suddenly realized that something was wrong with her surroundings. Whether it was the buildings on both sides of the street, the flowers by the roadside, or the trash can, they had all become a lot bigger without her noticing. But then she realized that it was not the things around her that had become bigger, but she herself had become smaller. Then she realized that what she hit was not a transparent wall, but the bottom of a bottle. She did not know when, but she was inside a glass bottle. Before she could try to get out, the bottle was picked up from the ground and covered with a cap. The lowly ghost's ability to go through walls seemed to have lost its effect. No matter how hard she struggled, she could not get out of the bottle. Then she saw the person who trapped her through the glass bottle. The person looked to be about her age, a little girl with a mushroom hairstyle similar to cherry meatballs. But the other party seemed to have not slept well for a few days. Her eyes were like a dead fish's with a strange light. I caught her just like that. This ghost is surprisingly stupid. The other party shook the bottle, causing the lowly ghost to feel dizzy before muttering in a low voice. Then a middle-aged man behind her asked excitedly, "Earth God, what kind of magic weapon is this? Is it like the purple gold Gordon journey to the west?" "No, it's just an ordinary bottle that I tore off after eating the yellow peach and syrup." The girl half opened her dead fish eyes and shattered the man's dream with a lackadaisical tone. "I originally wanted to use a cola bottle, but a few days ago I sold all the plastic bottles at home to the garbage collector." At this moment Ding Yong was greatly shocked. Wait, could this be the legendary magical power that could turn grass, wood, earth, and stone into magic weapons? Fortunately, the worldview of the nerdy cultivation novel was unbreakable. Soon he found a theory to explain this situation from the novels he had read before. As expected of Earth God. So he flattered from the bottom of his heart like a fat translator in a Nazi movie. "There's no need to say such things." Earth Goddess lowly yawned. "I still have something to do later. Take this ghost to Sakura Apartments and let that person deal with it." "No problem, leave it to me." Ding Yong patted his chest and swore, "I will definitely hand this over to that master successfully." The sleep-deprived Earth God lowly didn't say anything. She just passed the bottle to Ding Yong, turned around, waved her hand and staggered away. After watching the ghost leave, Ding Yong sized up the ghost in the glass bottle. Although his cultivation level wasn't high, he was still a cultivator, so he could still use his spirit vision. At this moment, the lowly ghost had already lost her human form. Instead, she was like a drop of ink that had fallen into clear water. She had turned into a mass of pitch black, constantly churning and surging, but no matter how hard she tried, she was unable to escape from the bottle. Although the black mass gave off the feeling of smoke, the bottle was actually quite heavy in his hand. According to Ding Yang's estimation, it probably weighed about 5 to 6 kilograms. After spending some time to make sure that the black fog couldn't break out of the bottle no matter how hard it tried, Ding Yong was finally relieved. He called a taxi and planned to go to the suburbs. However, before the taxi arrived, Ding Yong felt that the glass bottle in his hand suddenly lightened. Shocked, he hurriedly took the bottle in front of his eyes to examine it, but found that it was empty. How is this possible? There was no obvious gap on the bottle, and he had only slightly diverted his attention, but the thing inside had escaped. Full of doubts, he thought for a moment and carefully opened the bottle cap. Almost at the same time, a gust of air suddenly blew out of the bottle. It really was a trick. Suddenly Ding Yong understood. The ghost probably had the ability to fly to a certain extent. When the Earth God handed the bottle to him, it deliberately flew downward. Because the bottle was blocked by the Earth God's divine power, the downward force was very weak. However, it was enough to give Ding Yong the illusion that the bottle was very heavy. After that, it suddenly stopped flying downward and just hovered in the bottle, turning itself transparent through a trick. This sudden change would give Ding Yong, who was holding the bottle, the illusion that the thing inside had escaped. And what the ghost was waiting for was the moment when Ding Yong opened the bottle cap in order to confirm. "You're actually so scheming. Damn little monster." Ding Yong, who had figured out the cause and effect in an instant, became angry out of humiliation. He picked his ear and took out a flying sword that was about half the length of a toothpick. In the end, just as he got into position and didn't have time to make the sword art to make the flying sword grow, a taxi not far away honked at him. "You're the one who called the taxi, right?" The taxi driver poked his head out of the car and looked suspiciously at Ding Yong, who was in a strange position. "You can't stop here for too long. If the traffic police see you, you'll be in trouble. Hurry up and get in." But I have something to do." "Hey, if you have something to do, don't call a taxi. You're wasting my time." The driver frowned and his face darkened. He cursed and left, leaving Ding Yang standing alone in the autumn wind, feeling awkward for some reason. Oh no, a monster. Ding Yang, who had finally regained his senses, looked up, but there was no trace of the ghost. This city is too scary. I've had enough. I want to go home. The ghost slowly transformed into a spirit and quickly ran through the streets. She had forgotten about finding prey, gathering a body and coming back from the dead. Now she only wanted to leave this scary city as soon as possible. When she met a 1,000-year-old ghost, she could still comfort herself that this city was a paradise for ghosts. When she met a monster, she could still force herself not to panic. But King hundreds of monsters of all shapes and sizes, and an expert who could shrink her into the size of a date and put her in a glass bottle. The appearance of these two factors caused her to break down. After running for more than 10 minutes, she suddenly saw a young man with a hedgehog head walking in front of her. He had thin hair and was holding a Blu-ray disc that contained part of her. Suddenly, as if she had seen a relative, she turned into a gust of wind and flew towards the disc in the young man's hand, wanting to hide inside. Chapter 607. When Song-yu returned to Sakura's apartment, she found Su Xinxing looking at Sakura's closet with a complicated expression. After she coaxed Chiketsu back to his room, she asked Su Xinxing the reason. Su Xinxing awkwardly scratched his head. It's a bit complicated. He didn't seem to know where to start explaining. After a while, he helplessly continued. You'll know when you get close to the closet. Is that so? Song-yu blinked in confusion. Because she believed from the bottom of her heart that Su Xinxing wouldn't harm her, she followed his instructions and approached the closet that was usually used to store out-of-season bedding. Woo-woo. As a result, Song-yu discovered that the closet was emitting waves of a woman's resentful sobbing. Did you lock Emoli in there? Song-yu couldn't help but ask curiously. This kind of thing can't lock up Emoli, Su Xinxing sighed. Then who's in there? Wu Jingjing? Why would I lock up a shut-in girl in a place like this? That's true. Song-yu touched the handle and found that the closet wasn't locked. Huh, it's actually open? Can I open it? Go ahead. Su Xinxing didn't move. So the girl opened the closet and found a little girl in white about the same age as Emoli curled up inside. At this moment the little girl was hugging her knees and curled up into a ball, trembling and crying. She kept muttering things like, "This city is so scary. I want to go home. Humans are so scary," and so on. She looked very pitiful. But this wasn't the main point. The main point was that beside the little girl, there were two balls of ghostly blue phosphorescence that could only be seen in cemeteries. Song-yu hesitated for a moment, then closed the closet door again and looked at Su Xinxing. Although she didn't say anything, the meaning in the girl's eyes was very clear. What kind of thing did you bring back this time? Su Xinxing could only smile bitterly. Listen to me, it really has nothing to do with me this time. I was just walking on the road when a gust of demonic wind suddenly blew, and then a sinister aura swept towards me. Any normal person would subconsciously throw a punch in the direction of the sinister aura, right? I think a normal person would choose to run. The girl didn't hesitate to ridicule Su Xinxing. In short, was it because you punched her that she was so scared? Well, to be honest, the situation back then was quite tragic. Even though Su Xinxing had only subconsciously attacked without using much strength, not even a complete corpse was left behind. Pieces of flesh, broken bones, pieces of internal organs and blood covered most of the street. The largest piece was no bigger than a fingernail. It was as if a bomb had exploded in one's body, and it was the kind that had a huge explosive yield. In a sense, compared to a murder scene coupled with the somewhat gloomy weather, it was closer to the style of a horror movie, the kind that told the story of a psychopathic murderer. Xiao Jingyi, who was called over by Su Xinxing to clean up the scene, was probably still miserably sweeping the street. Interestingly, Su Feng, who arrived later, did a rough DNA comparison on the pieces of the corpse and found that the DNA of the pieces of flesh was actually very different. They didn't even come from the same person. The result was obvious. The guy who was constructed by collecting the body tissues of the victims was punched into shit by Su Xinxing. The paranormal case that had troubled Jiang Jin's super administrative office for nearly a week was mysteriously solved. Not only was Su Xinxing dumbfounded, But even the super administrative office had a rather subtle constipated expression on their faces. It was not easy for them to muster up the energy to do something, but in the end Sushenshin closed the case with a punch. It would have been fine if they had gone through a meticulous reasoning and a fierce chase. But to come across and end the case when they were just out shopping, they just couldn't get over it. In the end, the body that was left behind was relatively intact. The only thing that was left was the body that was trembling in fear due to the various strange things that happened in Jiangjin. It was unknown if it could still be considered a vengeful spirit. Actually, it's fine now. When I brought her back, she had been hiding in the CD and refused to come out. In the end, Su Xinxing did not forget to add, I see. She's the vengeful spirit in the cursed Blu-ray CD that Officer Xiao told you about. Although he took the dog girl out for a walk because he was scared, he still had some understanding of the topic because he heard the first half of the story. Then how did you get her out of the CD? Did you play the CD? Haha, I don't want to boast, but I don't have anything that can play Blu-ray at home. Well, I do have a VCD player. Su Xinxing replied with a smile. I'm not boasting, and it's a VCD player and not a DVD player. How many years ago is that thing? Song Yu could not help but facepalm. There's also a VCD player that can play videotapes, but it's been in the attic for a long time. I don't know if it's working properly. Su Xinxing did not care much about this. After all, whether it was a VCD player or a DVD player, it was basically useless in this era where people could watch videos on their mobile phones. As for how I got her out, of course I used my fingers to pinch her and directly pulled her out of the CD. Pinch where? How? Although she felt that there was something wrong with this method of exorcism, in the end the girl decided not to say anything. In short, I probably used too much force when I pulled her out. After I got her out, she kept crying inside, giving me a bit of a headache. In the end, Su Xinxing came to a conclusion. He spread out his hands. This way, I can't even have a peaceful conversation with her. Maybe it was because he was too rough with her before, so he felt a bit guilty. This time, Su Xinxing did not simply choose to purify her soul physically. Instead, he planned to have a good talk with her. Maybe everyone had the same feeling. When they played some horror games, they would feel scared because of the atmosphere. But when the boss appeared, there was no such feeling of terror. For players, it was probably the feeling of, as long as the HP bar is lit, even if it's a god, I'll kill you. The most terrifying thing was always the unknown. This was also true for normal people. Although Song Yu was still scared when she heard the ghost story, when she saw that the so-called vengeful spirit was just a little girl shivering in the closet, plus Su Xinxing was right next to her, Song Yu's courage naturally grew. How about, she seemed to be interested, let me try. Chapter 608. The lowly ghost who had been pulled out of the closet by Su Xinxing was kneeling on the coffee table, shivering. Song Yu sat on the sofa across from Fang Jing, as if she was preparing for what she wanted to say. Su Xinxing leaned down on the sofa. As insurance, he looked at the girl and the ghost in front of him with interest. Let's start with your name. After a moment, Song Yu showed a perfect goddess-like gentle smile that she would only put on in front of outsiders and asked, What's your name? Shivering, the lowly ghost that was trembling like a little quail turned her head to look at Su Xinxing. If she wanted to ask for information, she had to make the other party let down her guard. Taking this into consideration, Su Xinxing rubbed his stiff face, then squeezed out what he thought, a smile as gentle as Song Yu's. Shivering. As a result, the lowly ghost trembled even harder. Song Yu glanced at Su Xinxing in annoyance. The latter was shamelessly whistling to the sky as if nothing had happened. Don't worry, with me here he won't hurt you, if you're obedient. So the girl could only try to comfort the lowly ghost that seemed like she would be scared into a puff of smoke and disappear at any moment. The lowly ghost carefully looked at Su Xinxing, but as soon as she turned her head, she found that Su Xinxing was also looking at her. She was so scared that she quickly turned her head and nodded at Song Yu. It's good that you can cooperate. Then the question from before, what's your name? Song Yu nodded with satisfaction, then repeated her previous question. Xiao Ruiying, the lowly ghost answered softly. Su Xinxing's eyes widened slightly. The same surname as Xiao Jingyi? Wait, if I remember correctly, that guy seemed to have said that it was an opportunity for him to apply for the police academy. It should be a coincidence, right? In the end he could only come to this conclusion in his heart. Xiaoroying? It's a pretty good name. Song Yu took the opportunity to praise the other party's name, probably wanting to use this to ease the other party's vigilance. Unexpectedly, the lowly ghost continued to speak. Fan Shuoqi. Feng Dixing. Feng Yu. Tidi. Xiong. Fan Wen. Ixin Wan Lu. Huh. Song Yu was stunned. On the other hand, Su Xinxing seemed to have thought of something and frowned slightly. Could it be, then he asked the lowly ghost, are these the fake names you used when you took human form and mingled in human society? No, these are my names. Tisk as expected, so what are you guys talking about? If it's convenient, can you bring me along? At the side, Song Yu, who was being ignored, pouted and complained in dissatisfaction. When Su Xinxing heard this, he revealed a thoughtful and distressed expression. He was not good at describing things and did not know how to explain the lowly ghost situation. It's not a riddle. It's just like what the other party said. What she said just now were all her own names. At this moment, a lazy voice came from the other side of the sofa. Song Yu subconsciously looked over and saw that the earth god of Jiangjin was curled up on the sofa, desperately holding up his heavy eyelids. His head was nodding as if he would fall asleep at any time. This girl is an amalgamation of vengeful spirits. Even though it was suspected that she had not slept at all last night to cultivate, the lowly ghost's words were still coherent and clear. Just based on what I can sense, there are already more than 20 of them. However, the similarity of these vengeful spirits is rather terrifying, so from their behavior and appearance on the surface, it seems that there is only one person who is the same. 20. Song Yu first revealed a shocked expression, then instantly returned to her original appearance. She just stared at the lowly ghost lying on the table in confusion. It doesn't feel like there's anything to be afraid of? Because she was not a member of the circle, Song Yu did not know what these vengeful spirits represented or how terrifying they were. However, she knew one thing, and that was that as long as Su Xinxing was here, it did not matter what kind of monsters appeared. Indeed, whether it was 20 or an amalgamation of 200,000 vengeful spirits, there was almost no difference under Su Xinxing's fist. In any case, they would all be killed with one punch. Speaking of which, why are you here? Su Xinxing's attention also shifted from the lowly ghost to the earth god. Because Ding Yang said that he accidentally let that guy escape, so I specially came over to explain to you. At this point, the lowly ghost sighed. In the end, you guys have already caught it again. So this guy had already been caught. No wonder he had an uneasy expression when he saw the lowly ghost just now. As expected, in order to prevent it from escaping a second time, we should get a dye ball. That thing doesn't work on spirits, right? How can you be so sure that it doesn't work if you haven't tried it? You have to be brave in everything you do. No, according to common sense, that thing has no way of touching spirits. You're talking about common sense with people in this rundown apartment? Stop. If you want to chat, wait until I'm done with my business here. Seeing that old Su seemed like he was going to talk for a long time with the lowly ghost, Song Yu immediately interrupted their interaction. Anyway, you guys should be quiet first. I'm not done with my questions yet. Su Xinxing and the lowly ghost looked at each other, then very tacitly quieted down. For Su Xinxing, Song Yu was responsible for almost half of Sakura Apartment's meals. If he angered her and she was angry, she would eat seafood for every meal. Old Su would probably have to go to the toilet and sleep on the floor. The lowly ghost was also very interested in this strange vengeful spirit, so she quieted down and waited for the other party to continue. Seeing this, Song Yu continued to ask, "How did you become like this?" "I don't know." The lowly ghost shrank her neck and whispered, "When I woke up, I was already like this." "Then do you still remember how you died?" At this time, the god of earth interrupted and asked, "How I died?" The lowly ghost was halfway through her recital when her entire body froze. Immediately after, her body began to tremble slightly. It was not the kind of trembling just now, but as if she was recalling memories that she did not want to recall. It was a slight but uncontrollable tremble. Then expressions of fear, hatred, sadness, and regret appeared on her face one after another. We were murdered." At this moment she forgot to be afraid and cried out involuntarily, "A murder." Song Yu was startled by the other party. "I keep feeling." Su Xinxing's mouth twitched downward, and he rubbed his temples with a helpless expression. It seems like we've been involved in something troublesome again. Chapter 609. Compared to a natural death, it was true that being murdered was more likely to cause the appearance of wraiths. However, compared to the wraiths in movies that could easily kill people, the wraiths in reality were actually quite weak. At most, they could make the murderer feel a chill run down his spine, but they had no way of dealing a fatal blow. After all, a spirit was just some kind of residue produced after a person died. Naturally, it was impossible for it to be stronger than when it was alive. If you couldn't beat the murderer when you were alive, how could you beat the murderer when you were dead? Moreover, just like a joke said, if a person killed by a ghost died and became a ghost, wouldn't it be very awkward to meet after death? Wraiths that could interfere with reality and cause the death of others had already broken away from the category of normal wraiths. They were under the influence of something and had undergone changes. They could be classified as monsters. It had to be said that the spirit ghosts under Old Sue's command were this type of existence. However, the ghost Loli was a special case. Her essence was still that of a wraith, but because of some strange situation, nearly 20 wraiths had gathered together. Although it was still very difficult to interfere with reality, it could already affect the human mind. Do you want to find the murderer who murdered you to take revenge? With things as they were, Su Xinxing naturally didn't plan on staying out of the matter, so he straightforwardly asked. In any case, it was a scumbag who had killed so many people. In a situation where there was decisive evidence, if that person died in an accident, the people from the super administration probably wouldn't say anything. Speaking of which, you shouldn't be a local wraith, right? However, before the other party could answer, the earth god Loli spoke first. As far as I know, there hasn't been a serial murder case with as many as 20 people in Jiangjin in the past 10 years. Speaking of which, it seems that the main culprit, the Blu-ray disc, really did come from somewhere else. Being rebuked like this, Su Xinxing also remembered this matter. Southern Chu. Although my initial memories are a bit hazy, we came from Southern Chu. The ghost Loli said in a small voice. Southern Chu. Then no wonder. The earth god of Jiangjin suddenly nodded with a look of understanding. Because of the layout of the geomancy in that city, it's very easy to form some areas of darkness. It's not incomprehensible for the ghosts there to mutate. Is that so? The last time I went there with Xiao Jingyi, I didn't see anything special. Su Xinxing scratched his head in puzzlement. Those ghosts probably got lucky and didn't run into you. The earth god Loli yawned. Also, Lord Aoli has recently become the chief engineer and is commanding the subway construction team over there. He plans to improve the feng shui there. Speaking of which, Brother Long did seem to have studied civil engineering in a human university. Could it be that you had long wanted to do this kind of thing? Su Xinxing thought. However, when he thought about that person's tragic experience, he still felt that the other party probably didn't have such foresight and was just lucky. So you're still planning to go to Southern Chu to find the murderer? Do you want to obtain a body so you can interfere with reality? After figuring out the other party's background, Su Xinxing asked the same question again. If it can really be done, it should be able to complete our obsessions and allow us all to go to the afterlife. The lowly ghost lowered her head and said in an unusually sorrowful voice, but unfortunately this is impossible. Su Xinxing and Song Yu both showed puzzled expressions. The earth god Loli's little head nodded as if she had already begun to doze off. Because by the time we regain our self-awareness, the murderer will have already died of old age. That's possible. Song Yu opened her eyes wide and said in surprise. Dying of old age is still possible. Even Su Xinxing, who was always calm in the face of change, couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth twice because of the other party's unexpected response. Actually, this isn't anything strange. Ghosts are the dregs of humans. They don't have organs such as brains and almost only have instincts. If they want to regain their self-awareness and the ability to think, they need a large amount of yin energy and the accumulation of time. The earth god Loli, who seemed to have already fallen asleep, suddenly opened her mouth and said, for such a complicated existence like her, the process of regaining her rationality probably took more than 10 years. If the culprit is already very old, then it's normal for her to die during this period of time. Then how can the current you be reincarnated? Su Xinxing stared at the ghost Loli, then raised his fist and said, "Don't tell me you still have to use spiritual expiation, physical expiation? Please don't." The ghost lowly immediately begged for mercy pitifully. "Actually, we still have some obsessions that we want to complete." "What?" Su Shinxing began to blow air on his fist. "That. The 20 people's wishes are not the same, but basically they all want to try hamburgers, play games, and so on." The ghost lowly weakly replied. "Why is it this kind of wish?" Song Yu couldn't help but be curious. "Because we were killed when we were very young. Many people have never eaten delicious food, never played with the toys they wanted to play with. We just want to do some things that we didn't have time to do when we were alive." The ghost Loli's voice became softer and softer, and her attitude became more and more dejected. At the end, she cautiously raised her head slightly, looking at Su Shinxing and the others through her bangs like a timid animal. Then she immediately lowered her eyes and asked in a small voice, "Can't I?" In the next moment, Song Yu hugged her. Because the action was too sudden, the lowly ghost let out a mournful cry. "Oh, careful, I've decided. I'll be the one to send this little guy to the afterlife." Then she said to Su Shinxing, "Do you need my help?" Su Shinxing shook his casserole-sized fist. "Physical? I want to fulfill their wishes and complete their obsessions." The girl ignored Su Shinxing's joke and only said seriously. She stared into Su Shinxing's eyes, pausing after each word, "You'll help me, right?" Okay, if you don't need me to pay for it." In the end, Su Shinxing could only admit defeat under her clear gaze, and let out a long sigh. "Yeah." The victorious Song Yu made a peace sign above the ghost Loli's head, and revealed a beautiful smile like a rose. "Super Administrative Office. Justice, what are you looking at?" Fong Shaoqing, who had finished patrolling, returned to the office and found that Xiao Jingyi, who had been sweeping the streets, dealing with supernatural traces, was already sitting in his seat looking at something. "It's nothing, just some newspaper clippings I made in the past." Xiao Jingyi closed the notebook with the yellowed newspaper clippings, and smiled at his partner. "Hey, you've made newspaper clippings before?" Fong Shaoqing, who was hanging her hat on the hat rack, couldn't help but be interested. "Yeah, I made it a long time ago. Whenever I feel a bit bored or tired from work, I'll take it out and look at it. It reminds me not to forget my original intention of becoming a police officer." Xiao Jingyi replied. "Original intention? Can you tell me about it?" Fong Shaoqing, who was making tea, casually asked. "That was about 10 years ago when I was still living in southern Chu." Xiao Jingyi hesitated for a moment and then slowly said, "At that time, I had a younger sister who was 6 years younger than me. Her name was Xiao Ruing." Chapter 610. This wasn't a complicated or bizarre story. On the border of southern Chu, in a village near a mountain forest, there once lived an ordinary family. The master and mistress of the house ran a small store. Thanks to the help of the villagers, the business of the small store was quite prosperous. Perhaps because they had more to live on, after the couple had a son, they paid a fine and had a second child, a daughter, when their son was 6 years old. It was different from when they had a son. At that time, the culture was more liberal and names didn't need to be read and specific. As a result, their daughter's name was Ruo Ying, which felt like two completely different styles from her brother's name. Although this is a digression, my old man once wanted to name me Zhangwo. But because there were already 7 or 8 people named Zhangwo in the village at that time, my old man changed it to Justice. The older brother was very jealous of his younger sister. When he was young, his parents were busy every day because they hadn't even started a business, often leaving him alone at home. But after his younger sister was born, because the family business was on the right track, his parents often took time out to take care of his younger sister. This made the boy feel that his younger sister not only enjoyed treatment he had never enjoyed before, but also took away his parents' love and care. As a result, he disliked his younger sister very much. But for some reason, the boy's younger sister often liked to stick to her older brother. When they were children, his younger sister would often run around behind her older brother. At night, she would often clamor to sleep with her older brother. Even if she got something to eat or play with, she would immediately share it with her older brother. That boy was also an idiot. He had clearly already imperceptibly accepted his younger sister, but he still said that he disliked her. 10 years passed and the 6-year-old boy became a 16-year-old youth. Because he had started school a year earlier than his peers, he was about to face one of the turning points of his life, the college entrance exam. At that time, the youth's dream was to become a scholar in the field of mathematics, physics, and chemistry. In addition, as the eldest son of the family, his parents had high expectations for him. As a result, his goal was set very high and he wanted to enter one of the top universities in the country. Naturally, this high goal also brought with it an extraordinary pressure to study. Because of the pressure, the originally outgoing and cheerful youth gradually became depressed and locked himself in the house. Even his temper began to become somewhat surly. Even so, his 10-year-old sister was always by his side. Now that he thought about it, when he was at his loneliest and had to bear the pressure brought by his parents' expectations, it was such a happy thing to have someone to accompany him. Because she couldn't help her brother with anything, at least she had to accompany him. Her sister was so gentle and considerate. Unfortunately, the youth at that time did not realize this. He was selfish and only cared about his own pain, only his own feelings. Finally, one day he couldn't remember the English words in his mind no matter how hard he tried. He was so anxious that he vented his anger on the little girl who was quietly reading a picture book. He thought that it was the little girl who distracted him and made him unable to memorize the words. So annoying. I hate you. She even said such outrageous words because of her hot-headedness. Even now, the young man could still remember how the girl hugged the book and left the room sobbing under his scolding. Instead of saying that she was sad because she was scolded, it was more like she was sad because she had been betrayed. After the girl left, the uneasiness in his conscience made it even harder for the youth to concentrate on his revision. The summer cicadas on the tree outside the window kept repeating their dry and ear-piercing chirps. Before air conditioners were popularized, even the air blown out by electric fans was hot. The steamer-like environment made the youth's emotions even more chaotic. In the end, he put down the revision materials in his hands and went out to look for his sister. But after searching for a long time, he still couldn't find her. In the evening, he thought maybe she's already home and I'll apologize to her at night, and returned home. However, he and his parents waited at home until very late, but his sister still didn't come back. The girl went missing. After that, his parents spent a lot of effort to find her. They called the police and mobilized the villagers to help search for her. The youth also threw the college entrance exam aside and searched for his sister in the wilderness over and over again. Then, on the third day after she went missing, the youth found his sister's body in a field that he had already searched many times. The body, the body, the body. Xiao Jingyi's voice choked when he said this. Fang Xiaoqing looked at him strangely and found that his face was twisted in pain. Even by his side she could feel the great sadness and unwillingness. Fang Xiaoqing clenched her teeth and reached out to hug Xiao Jingyi. It's okay. It's all in the past. It's okay if you don't talk about it. She gently patted his back and felt his body gradually relax as she comforted him softly. No, I've been holding it in for 10 years. Just let me say it. Xiao Jingyi didn't break free from her embrace. Instead, he continued to speak in a posture that would 100% be seen as a public display of affection. When I found her deformed corpse, she was clutching a 4-leaf clover tightly in her hand. That kind of cruel scene even made the police officers who heard the news retch. But they couldn't find the murderer. From then on, I changed my ambition and chose to apply for the police academy. My sister's revenge will be taken by me. Looks like you succeeded. No, I failed. When I graduated from the police academy and contacted my friend who was working there, I found out that the murderer who killed my sister was a lonely old man who had committed serial murders. Moreover, the case was solved not because of an investigation, but because the old man was too old and died of old age in his sleep. When his body started to rot, it was discovered by someone. When the police cleaned up the scene, they found evidence that he had committed crimes and confirmed this point. At this point, Fang Xiaoqing felt Xiao Jingyi's body tremble slightly. I can't accept it. How could that kind of person leave so peacefully? Why didn't I catch that guy and let my sister rest in peace? If I didn't chase Ruoying away, maybe this wouldn't have happened. That child suffered such painful treatment, she must have hated me until her death. From then on, I decided that no matter what, I would never let my name down. Even if I had to risk my life, I wouldn't let my tragedy happen to others. Xiao Jingyi's voice sounded a bit depressed. Was he crying? This was the first time Feng Xiaoqing had seen Xiao Jingyi so weak. Although he couldn't be compared to the one in Sakura's apartment, Xiao Jingyi wouldn't back down even when facing supernatural creatures that were far beyond human beings. After Su Feng and the others were transferred, he took up the role of Jiang Jin's super administrator and ran around the city all day long. It wasn't because there was an invincible expert behind him. Even if there wasn't the one in Sakura's apartment, Xiao Jingyi wouldn't turn a blind eye to those demons and monsters who committed crimes. In the recent incident, he had even suffered a life-threatening injury. But even so, Xiao Jingyi still didn't think of quitting the super administrator and becoming an ordinary person. In fact, Feng Xiaoqing had always felt that Xiao Jingyi's bravery had exceeded the scope of ordinary people. It had even reached the point where he gave up on himself and didn't care even if he died. Now that she thought about it, this bravery probably didn't come from that invincible existence, but from his unwillingness and sadness because he couldn't save his sister. Chapter 6:11. A pair of spicy chicken wings, a red bean pie and a glass of Coke. Is that all? A large order of fries, a New Orleans roasted chicken burger and a glass of orange juice. Or just order. A mashed potato, a rock-roasted seaweed chicken and rice set and vegetable soup. Can you really finish all of that? Give me a family bucket too. Hey. Su Shinxing reached out and grabbed the lowly ghost who was still randomly ordering at the counter like grabbing a little chick. Don't order so much just because you're not paying for it. Can't I? The little girl's eyes were filled with tears and her body was trembling. That pitiful look made it seem like she was about to cry at any moment. Suddenly, the surrounding people's gazes of "Look, that Baldy is abusing the child. Should we take a picture and post it on the internet? Oh my god, why is my picture blurred?" and so on pierced Su Shinxing's heart. Seeing this, Song Yu could only laugh dryly and take out his phone to pay for the lowly ghost. Then the three of them took their trays and hid in a corner of the restaurant. As soon as they sat down, the lowly ghost happily picked up the chicken drumstick and started eating it in big bites. Although Emily could also eat a lot, but most of the time when she was eating, her behavior was quite gentle. Most of the people who were with her could only feel a gust of cold wind, and then the food on their plates disappeared. But the little girl still sat upright. In comparison, the lowly ghost was more like a gluttonous little brat from a well-educated family. Speaking of which, it's just shopping and eating. Is this really useful? Su Shinxing supported his chin and asked discontentedly. In fact, Kaifeng restaurant was not the first restaurant they had visited. They had already swept through most of the food stores on this commercial street. And the body that the lowly ghost was using now was made by Jiang Jin's earth god through some kind of spell using clay. According to the earth god himself, this ritual, which imitated the process of Nuwa creating humans, could be made into a carrier that was most in line with the concept of human in the Eastern magic system. If it was only used for a day, it would be almost no different from the body of a real person. After doing all this, the earth god turned back into the original abandoned lowly. After waving her hand and saying that she would leave everything to Su Shinxing, she disappeared with a whoosh. "Why don't you let me help you release your soul? It must be useful." Shivering, the lowly ghost answered resolutely, "I feel that I'm 21 grams lighter. Maybe it's 35 grams. You've already eaten more than 35 grams, right? Hey," Su Shinxing complained with an embarrassed expression. "In short, Ruoying, if you have any feelings you must tell us, okay?" Song Yu also instructed with concern. Although the lowly ghost's body seemed to be formed by many ghosts glued together, because the name she first reported was Xiao Ruing, Su Shinxing and the others still called her by this name. Okay. The little girl hurriedly nodded. After eliminating the small mountain of food, the three of them continued to wander the streets of Jiangjin. Interestingly, although the lowly ghost had eaten a lot, her stomach was still flat, and they did not know where the food had gone. "Ah, a movie. I want to watch it." After seeing the advertisement board erected by a cinema on the business street, the lowly ghost began to shout excitedly. "When you were alive, have you never watched a movie before?" Song Yu asked curiously. "I've watched a tunnel war." The lowly ghost answered happily. "It's so old." Su Shinxing and Song Yu cursed in their hearts. But at that time, There was a projectionist uncle who brought a machine to the grain field in the village, set up a white curtain and played the movie. Every time that happened we would carry chairs to the grain field to watch the movie. The lowly ghost showed a nostalgic expression. Although we were very happy at that time, the projectionist uncle told us that the real movie was played on a bigger screen and it looked very good. Su Shinxing showed a look of understanding. He had heard his classmates in the countryside talk about similar things, but the scene they described was when he was young. It seemed that Xiao Ruiying's death should have been quite a long time ago. So, we've long wanted to see a real movie in a big city. The lowly ghost did not notice Su Shinxing's expression, and was only thinking about the regrets she had when she was alive. Song Yu naturally agreed to this. She took the lowly ghost, grabbed Su Shinxing's arm and went to buy tickets together. The movie told the story of a bear cub's experience in a big city. Although there were not many thrilling places, it was heartwarming and could be considered a good recent translation. Clearly it was the lowly ghost's first time watching this kind of movie. Even after leaving the theater she walked between Su Shinxing and Song Yu, holding their hands and excitedly told the movie's plot. From an outsider's point of view, this scene looked like a young parent with a child. But when walking on the road Su Shinxing suddenly felt his scalp go numb, and involuntarily looked across the road. In the end he saw Mo Li, who for some reason had a bucket of popcorn on his head, staring at him with a gaze that said, "I didn't expect you to be this kind of landlord." Su Shinxing guiltily let go of the lowly ghost's hand. "Hey, isn't that Mo Li?" Song Yu also noticed Su Shinxing's gaze, and looked over to see Mo Li, who was obediently waiting for the green light at the zebra crossing. Then the green light lit up and Mo Li expressionlessly appeared in front of Su Shinxing. It was clearly a very strange scene, but the surrounding pedestrians acted like they didn't see anything, minding their own business or looking at their phones, turning a blind eye to the strange scene in front of them. "Cough, there's a reason for this, Emily, let me explain. Simply put, this and that happened." "Oh, this and that, so there's no way to explain it." Emily crossed his arms and expressionlessly nodded. This action made the bucket of popcorn on his head wobble, making people worry that it would fall at any time. Wait a minute, how is this exchange established? Unlike Song Yu, who vaguely knew that there was some kind of connection between old Su and Mo Li, the lowly ghost who witnessed the whole process couldn't help but ask, "Why can it be understood just by saying this and that?" Mo Li calmly looked at the lowly ghost for a moment, and then a slightly stunned expression appeared on his quiet little face. "That's right, say it. Don't think it's strange after I pointed it out. Do you want to eat popcorn?" Mo Li took the bucket of popcorn off his head and handed it to the lowly. "Isn't the change in topic a little too much? Though I want to eat. Popcorn is a good civilization, say it." And so the two lowlists who looked about the same age shared the popcorn scene, making Su Shinxing involuntarily squint his eyes. "Bulakon?" Song Yu, who was observing Su Shinxing from the side, suddenly said, "No, I just feel that Emily is unexpectedly friendly to that little guy." It wasn't that Su Shinxing wanted to clear his name of being a lolicon, but he really felt that it was a bit strange. Rather than saying that Emily was afraid of strangers, it was better to say that he had no interest in ordinary people. Naturally, he wouldn't have normal interactions and his behavior in school was quite cold. Only when he had interacted with people like Song Yu, Cui Yingying and Qin Xingyan for a period of time and got along well with them, would Emily show his friendliness, which was the stupid lowly side. So when he saw that Emily actually took the initiative to talk to the other party, Su Shinxing was shocked. Usually when Emily saw things like vengeful spirits he would probably cheer expressionlessly, and then swallow them in one gulp. According to him the taste was very cool, better than ice cream. Could it be that he wanted to try a new taste this time so he planned to fatten the other party up before eating it? No matter what, it was better to be friendly than to directly swallow the other party. So Su Shinxing's group continued to fool around with the lowly ghost. After walking around the business district, they went to a small amusement park that was built not long ago in the outskirts of Jiangjin. They rode the roller coaster and Ferris wheel, scared the staff to tears in the haunted house, and easily scored the highest score ever for entertainment like shooting. But during the whole process, Mo Li's face was calm, unswervingly sandwiched between Su Shinxing and the lowly ghost. Because of this, even Song Yu could only smile bitterly. When they left the amusement park it was close to dusk. When the magnificent burning clouds disappeared into the western sky, the sky finally gradually darkened. And they also went to the mountain behind Jiangjin University that overlooked half of Jiangjin. Standing on the abandoned observation deck, looking at the sparkling lights at the foot of the mountain not far away, the lowly ghost held the railing of the observation deck with both hands. Half of her body was leaning out, as if she wanted to imprint the scene in front of her into her mind. "How do you feel?" Su Xinxing opened his mouth to break the silence. "I'm really happy today." The lowly ghost jumped from the railing back to the observation deck. Boing. Song Yu looked a bit reluctant. Emily had the same expression as before, silently looking at the other party. The lowly ghost smiled. She turned her head, her gaze lingering on Su Xinxing's group for a moment. The moon that had just risen was like a huge white jade plate, becoming the background of the gentle girl. A holy and mysterious aura filled the air. The girl was like an immortal in the moon, hazy and illusory, but it made people yearn for her. Perhaps at this moment, people would believe that she was the real moon god. Although we can't remember the past clearly, but we've all been treated excessively, we have an instinctive fear of the world, and are even afraid of starting a new life. This is probably why we can't reincarnate. But I didn't think that we would be treated so gently after death. The lowly ghost bowed to Su Xinxing's group. "Thank you for believing our words, for believing that our past lives weren't fake. Thank you for helping us so much, allowing us to be freed from our long suffering. Thank you for allowing us to regain our faith and longing for this world. This way we should have the courage to go to the lost and unknown world of reincarnation." Tiny specks of light began to fly out from the lowly ghost's body, like fireflies in the wilderness in summer. In this cold night, they were like stars dancing around the little girl like a dream. "If you don't mind us ghosts giving our blessings, we wish you a beautiful future. A future where you can be so happy every day." Song Yu lowered her head, her expression somewhat sad. They had only known each other for a day, but it seemed like she liked her. Finally, with a cold wind in the winter night, those specks of light began to float, and finally disappeared into the winter night sky. Following the disappearance of the light, the girl's body was like an empty shell that gradually lost its soul, and slowly sat down on the ground. Su Xinxing looked at Emily and the latter nodded his head. It seemed like he was right. After those wraiths washed away their resentment and stubbornness, they were like ordinary souls, gradually disappearing and going to the place they should go to. "Emily, take back that body," Su Xinxing ordered Emily. Emily stuck his tongue out at him. He sighed, hesitated for a moment and then put his right hand on Song Yu's shoulder. "Let's go back." The sorrowful girl nodded and then leaned into Su Xinxing's embrace. At that moment, the girl who seemed to have become an empty shell suddenly moved. This gave Su Xinxing a fright, and Song Yu also felt Su Xinxing's movement and raised her head blankly. In the end, he saw the lowly ghost stiffly shaking her head. She shouted in surprise and wanted to run towards her, but was stopped by Su Xinxing. "Who are you?" Su Xinxing asked. "I'm Xiao Ruoying." The ghost lowly tried to stand up, but her movements looked like those of a paraplegic who had just regained a bit of feeling in her limbs. Saying that she was clumsy was already a compliment. "I don't know what's going on, but everyone has left, only I'm still here." Hearing her say this, Su Xinxing looked at Emily and the latter nodded vigorously like before. At that moment, Xiao Ruoying finally stood up, but before she could take the first step, her whole body fell forward. Luckily, she was caught by Emily. "Thank you, Emily." She first thanked Emily, then looked at Su Xinxing and said, "I think it's because my wish hasn't been fulfilled yet." "What wish?" Song Yu asked. "Xinxing and I will definitely help you think of a way." "I'm sorry that." The other party's face was bitter. "I can't remember." Walking on the streets of Jiangjin, Xiao Ruoying tried her best to control her pace. However, from an outsider's point of view, her movements were like a robot's dance. Her movements were stiff and gave off a strange vibe. Although Su Xinxing said that he could carry her, the girl stubbornly insisted on walking by herself, and believed that as long as she walked more she would be able to recover faster. This made Su Xinxing subconsciously want to say, "It's not like you're doing rehabilitation," but in the end he held it in and didn't say it. He guessed that the reason why she suddenly became like this was because the other wraiths had all disappeared, leaving Xiao Ruoying alone. Naturally, her own soul power had greatly weakened. and the body that she could control as easily as an extension of her arm had now become extremely difficult and heavy. "Landlord, I smell roasted sweet potatoes." At that moment, Emily suddenly pulled on Su Shenxing's clothes. "If you want to eat, say it." "Roasted sweet potatoes. That's great, I remember that my family used to grow sweet potatoes. Who did I roast sweet potatoes with?" Xiao Ruoying said excitedly at first, but after saying a few words she became confused because of her broken memory. She frowned and tried hard to recall that memory. "Don't try so hard to think about such small things. Oh right, maybe you'll remember after eating the roasted sweet potatoes. Emily, where's the roasted sweet potato stall?" Song Yu first comforted her, then turned her head to ask Emily. "On the street 12 kilometers away." Emily answered without hesitation. "Your nose is quite good." Song Yu, who had been infected by Su Shenxing's tendency to complain, couldn't help but say with an embarrassed face. "I'll go buy it with Emily." Su Shenxing measured Song Yu's physique, and felt that she might not be able to withstand a normal high-speed train, so he simply planned to bring along Emily for navigation and buy it. "There's a public bench here. You and Xiao Ruoying can sit for a while, we'll be right back." "Okay, do you have money?" "I still have money to buy sweet potatoes. Or rather, I've been treated by you for the whole day, at least let me treat you to something like this." Su Shenxing couldn't help but smile bitterly. "Then I'll have to trouble you." Song Yu smiled gently at Su Shenxing. "Come back soon." "Of course." Su Shenxing put Emily on his waist, winked at Song Yu and then disappeared. Song Yu smiled helplessly at the place where Su Shenxing disappeared, then helped Xiao Ruoying to the bench and wiped her sweat. "Sister Song Yu, how did you meet that person?" Xiao Ruoying rested for a while and asked Song Yu curiously. It's a long story." Song Yu couldn't help but think about where to start. When she had just finished thinking about what to say and was about to say it, she found that the girl she was supporting was looking at the sidewalk in front of the bench with her eyes wide open. Song Yu subconsciously looked in that direction and found a young man standing there. She knew him. "Officer Justice?" Song Yu called out softly. If it was in the past, Xiao Jingyi would probably laugh and ridicule her for calling him a chinibu. But today Xiao Jingyi didn't pay attention to her, he just looked at the girl behind her with a wavering expression that she had never seen before. "Ruoying?" He whispered the girl's name with a trembling voice. Then Song Yu felt a considerable force coming from her hand. The pale-faced Xiao Ruoying broke free from her hand and stumbled into the back alley. "Wait, Ruoying." Song Yu couldn't stop the girl in time. She hurriedly turned around and looked at the police officer who was trembling slightly, as if he had lost all his energy. Seeing that she couldn't count on him, she couldn't help but stomp her feet and chase after Xiao Ruoying. Seeing the other person's figure disappear into the alley, Xiao Jingyi painfully knelt on the ground. When he saw the other person running away without hesitation when she saw him, the regret and grief that he thought he would never experience again hit his heart. "Am I dreaming?" His face had lost all color, and his expression was twisted from great pain. His lips were bleeding because he had bitten them. "As expected, she still hates me." Chapter 6:12. Nanyang was a small city located in the south of Jiangjin. It was also the location of the Bailu Temple branch. At this time, at the entrance of a 3-story detached villa in the luxurious villa district of South Sea City, 2 strong men wearing sunglasses and black suits, the only thing missing was the word bodyguard written on their faces, were looking suspiciously at a girl in white who had just arrived. "Are you the Taoist master mentioned by the head of the Bailu Temple?" One of the bodyguards, who looked slightly older, asked. It wasn't because of his occupational disease or his paranoia, but because the girl in front of him was too young, and her appearance was too elegant and beautiful. If he didn't know that his employer didn't have any other appointments today, he would have thought that this girl was invited to keep him company. And to be honest, his employer's mistresses, who were usually quite attractive, couldn't even beat her in terms of beauty if they were doubled in value. But the girl didn't seem to want to talk to them. She just glanced at the 2 bodyguards indifferently. Under normal circumstances, 3 to 5 strong men couldn't even get close to her. But the 2 bodyguards suddenly felt as if their bodies had turned into stone sculptures. They were so stiff that they couldn't even move a finger. Then the girl floated forward, ignoring the solid and heavy security door and directly passing through it. When the corner of her pure white clothes disappeared from the door, the two bodyguards finally regained their freedom. They heaved a sigh of relief as if they had been granted amnesty. Then they looked at each other tacitly and reached out to touch the security door, wanting to see if their employer had installed a fake security door. Putting aside the two bodyguards' obscenity towards the security door, the young man who was sitting on the luxurious sofa in the villa's living room was also shocked by the girl's performance of passing through the wall. His whole body froze as he stared blankly at her. "I'm a true disciple of the Bailu Temple, the new Taoist master Qin Xingyan. Are you the client this time, Mr. Zhang?" The young girl's beautiful yet ethereal voice finally brought the young man back to his senses. He looked at the girl's face with some infatuation, then quickly lowered his head, probably afraid that his actions would offend her. This was also the reason why Qin Xingyan started the performance right from the beginning. Based on her previous exorcism experience, she knew that because of her age and appearance, it was easy for clients to look down on her or even have strange thoughts about her. After that, it would be very troublesome to dispel this prejudice. So, recently before she started, she had to show her power to the clients first so that they would be in awe of her. This was the only way to save herself from all the messy matters. "Yes, that thing is there," the young man answered respectfully. The young man replied respectfully, and when he got to the point he couldn't help but shudder. Then he pointed the dart he mentioned to Qin Xingyan. It was a solid wooden door covered with apricot talismans. No, instead of saying that the door was covered with talismans, it was more accurate to say that the walls of the room behind the door were covered with talismans. There were more talismans at the entrance and exit of the wooden door. The evil sealing talisman of the Jingyi sect. Qin Xingyan just glanced at it and roughly understood. These talismans were not fake. They were the real deal that had the effect of restraining evil spirits. Judging from the extravagance of the talismans and the residual spiritual power on the talismans, the person who cast the evil sealing talisman should be a famous big shot in the Jingyi sect. However, the talisman was different from the usual situation. This time, the evil sealing talisman of the Jingyi sect was not used to exterminate the evil spirit, but only to imprison it in that room. Taoist master really has a sharp eye. Those are the talismans pasted by Taoist master Xianqing of the Jingyi sect. While the young man was sincerely convinced, he tried to do something that he had almost never done in his life. Usually it was others who flattered him. Did the person in the Jingyi sect say what was inside? No, the Taoist master only said that it was a rare kind of resentful spirit. Its resentment was so strong that even he could do nothing about it. Qin Xingyan did not intend to listen to him in detail. She just waved her small hand and the talismans pasted on the door flew away. Then, under the young man's warning, she went through the wall again. However, it was different this time. As soon as Qin Xingyan entered the sealed storage room, she felt an obvious drop in temperature. If the outside was just a normal winter's cold, then the inside of the room was even colder than an ice cellar. It was almost to the extent that a glass of water would turn into ice when it fell to the ground. However, the most terrifying thing in this room was not the coldness. It was the twisted and profane evil existence that was invisible to the naked eye but very clear in Qin Xingyan's eyes. It was like a carpet of flesh, organs, eyeballs, and teeth that almost spread to the entire room's walls, floor, and ceiling. From the moment she entered the room, these strange existences had already evolved into tentacle-like things that swept towards her from all directions. If it was in the past, Qin Xingyan might have been flustered. However, she had now transcended the category of mortals and became an existence that resembled a celestial being. "How dare you?" She only snorted coldly, and those tentacles shrank back at an even faster speed as if they had been scalded by boiling oil. Then, those indescribable twisted things began to make blasphemous sounds that could make ordinary people lose their minds. It was as if hundreds of hands were scratching a blackboard with their nails, hundreds of pieces of foam plastic were rubbing against each other, and many people were screaming before they died. Even if one covered one's ears, it was useless because these maddening sounds would directly sound in one's mind. "Noisy." Qin Xingyan frowned and scolded. Suddenly the whole world fell silent. Those strange things made a hissing sound like a balloon leaking air and then calmed down. Perhaps they were a little anxious that they could not take down Qin Xingyan with their best trick. The carpet of flesh, organs, eyeballs and teeth began to swell, as if they wanted to directly squeeze Qin Xingyan to death. However, Qin Xingyan was faster than them. She had already thoroughly figured out the other party's background. They seem strong, but in reality they have only lost their minds and instinctively want to attack the living. They are a collection of vengeful spirits that have completely turned into monsters. How pitiful. Let me be here and set you free. She summoned her celestial sword, Red Sleeves. After becoming a celestial being, she had sacrificially refined the V1.02 version and strengthened it. With just one slash she turned those things into ashes. After receiving the payment from Mr. Zhang, Qin Xingyan took the high-speed rail back to Jiangjin. Although he could fly, he had been helping the Bailu Temple deal with business issues for the past 2 days. Even though he had become a celestial being and his body was always at its peak, the accumulated mental fatigue could not be resolved. In order to prevent himself from falling halfway and hitting someone, Qin Xingyan finally decided to take the high-speed rail. Anyway, the fare could be reimbursed by the Bailu Temple. Less than half an hour's ride was within the acceptable range. Yes, this time it was also a strange combination of vengeful spirits. However, just like the previous few times, the vengeful spirit that was the bond of the combination could not withstand the power of the other vengeful spirits and has been demonized. In the car, Qin Xingyan took the time to make a phone call to the Bailu Temple branch to report the situation. Including this time, we have dealt with a total of 4 similar cases recently. To be honest, Senior Marshal Brother, I don't think this can be considered a coincidence. The secular disciples of the Bailu Temple in the police station have also confirmed that there seem to be a few cases of disappearances recently. However, most of them were homeless people, so it did not cause too much of a stir. However, the police station has already started to investigate. Wait a minute, I just received a message from Grandmaster Black Pigeon's flying sword. Yes, Grandmaster Black Pigeon spends most of his time in the sex library, so he does not know how to use a mobile phone. According to his investigation, someone might be using an evil technique to possess someone's body. Possess someone's body? Qin Xingyan was stunned. It was not that she did not know what possession meant, but the other party had caused such a big commotion that even the secular government was alarmed. It was a little strange that it was only for possession. That's right. However, considering that evil cultivators usually do not cause such a big commotion when they possess someone's body, Grandmaster Black Pigeon guessed that the other party was not a cultivator, but an ordinary person who had obtained this evil technique. Those vengeful spirits and evil spirits should be the byproduct of the evil technique. An ordinary person. It's a little hard to imagine that he would kill so many people just for the sake of possession. Qin Xingyan felt that it was a little hard to accept. It's probably to prolong his life. I know that some people are willing to do anything in order to live a long life. Moreover, from the fact that the other party had created so many vengeful spirits and evil spirits, I'm afraid that his evil technique has not succeeded yet. He should be missing some key factors. For example, as a sacrifice, it requires a certain person's birthday and so on. Then, based on the location of the evil spirits and evil spirits, it is very likely that the other party has gone to Jiangjin. Oh, then his luck is really bad. Qin Xingyan immediately relaxed. Yes, I think so too. Judging from the voice of the old man sitting opposite him, it was obvious that he was also worried. After all, there was an existence in Jiangjin that even the Bailu Temple did not dare to provoke. Soon the high-speed train arrived at Jiangjin Station. Qin Xingyan squeezed through the exit while talking on the phone. As a result, when he was going up the stairs, he accidentally bumped into a man wearing a thick cotton-padded coat and a hat on his head. He was wrapped up tightly and had a strong smell of cologne on him. Sorry. Qin Xingyan apologized to the other party and continued to walk forward. But after a moment she stopped again and muttered softly, "You're right. Can't be that coincidental, right?" Then she immediately turned around, but there was no way for her to find that person in the crowd. You're tuning in to the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.